The brick moved under Mara's knee with a soft, gritty knock. She froze beside the broad potting table, one gloved hand braced against its scarred oak edge. The amber work lamp threw a small pool of warmth across the floor, but beyond it, the greenhouse was all winter light. Frosted panes, pale blue shadows, steel ribs, and rows of dormant beds. Through the glass, Briarwood Mansion stood uphill under patchy snow, every window reflecting the clear January sky. Mara shifted back with the stiffness she had been pretending not to feel. The brick was already loose. When she lifted it, damp grit clung to her worn brown glove, revealing a shallow dry space beneath the floor. A weathered metal box lay inside. She knew the box, or thought she did. Years ago, it had held the greenhouse survey and the papers for the separate well. Daniel had searched half a summer for it, accusing himself of putting it somewhere sensible, which was his term for any place he could no longer remember. Mara pulled it out, opened the stiff latch, and stared at a folded cream document. The sight of Daniel's name made her stop breathing. 6 days earlier, Grant Ellison had stood in the mansion kitchen eating a funeral sandwich over the sink. He had removed his black tie and draped it over the back of Daniel's chair. Mara noticed that before she noticed anything else. The tie looked offensively alive there, one end nearly touching the floor, as if Daniel might return and complain that somebody had dressed his furniture. Grant took another bite and glanced at the tray. Turkey? Ham, Lydia said. He examined the sandwich as though it had misrepresented itself in writing. Lydia stood at the kitchen island transferring food from disposable platters into Briarwood's china serving dishes. The last mourners had left 20 minutes earlier, but she was still arranging parsley around things nobody wanted. She had spent the reception telling people how important it was to preserve the character of the house. Mara sat at the table with a cup of coffee gone cold between her hands. She'd been awake since 4. At 4:30, she had reached across the bed toward Daniel before remembering the hospital had returned his wedding ring in a small plastic bag. At 5, she had gone downstairs and made coffee for 2. "Those lilies are making my throat close," Grant said. "They're funeral lilies," Lydia replied. "They're supposed to make you suffer." It was the sort of exchange that once would have made Daniel smile. Grant and Lydia had inherited his dry timing, though neither seemed to know it. Mara almost smiled herself. The impulse rose and disappeared before reaching her mouth. Lydia looked toward her. "You should go lie down. I'm sitting. You know what I mean." "I do." Mara's charcoal coat still hung over the mudroom hook, melting ice onto the slate. Her forest green scarf was tucked into one sleeve. She had worn both through the graveside service, along with dark trousers and boots that pinched one toe. She could still feel the pressure of Lydia's hand at her elbow as they walked away from the grave. Not quite affection, not quite guidance, but something performed correctly. Grant finished the sandwich and folded the napkin into a precise square. At 44, he had Daniel's height and none of his disorder. Even grief seemed to have arrived in Grant's preferred format. Dark suit, booked car, printed schedule. "We need to talk about the next few weeks," he said. Lydia stopped moving the parsley. Mara looked at Grant. "Do we?" "Not tonight, obviously. It's 3 in the afternoon. You know what I mean." That made Lydia look down. Mara wondered if she had heard herself in it. Grant pulled out the chair across from Mara but did not sit. "There are estate issues. Insurance, utilities, security, things that can't drift. Your father has been buried for an hour and a half. I'm aware." His voice tightened on the last word. For a moment he was not an executor in waiting or a man who used responsible as a weapon. He was a boy angered by the fact that his father had managed to die while Grant was out of the room. Then he straightened Daniel's tie on the chair. "There's an older will," he said. "Dad gave me a copy years ago. The house comes to Lydia and me." Mara waited. Lydia touched the rim of a serving dish. "We assumed you knew. Daniel and I didn't spend much time discussing what happened after he died. We were busy with what happened before." "That isn't fair," Grant said. Mara's weathered fingers tightened around the cup. "No, It wasn't. Grant sat then. His anger gave way to the patient expression he used whenever he believed calmness made him right. Nobody is trying to erase what you did for Dad. Lydia found a lid that did not fit the dish and pressed it anyway. Grant continued, but the property has enormous carrying costs. Taxes, heat, maintenance. We need to manage it responsibly. For 6 years, Mara had managed Briarwood's bills from that same table. She knew which section of roof leaked during a wind from the east, how much oil the boiler consumed in a cold month, and which plumber would answer on Christmas Eve because she had once brought his wife a tray of rosemary starts. Grant had received quarterly summaries. He responded to them with suggestions about reducing waste. "What does responsibly mean?" Mara asked. "It means we inventory the contents, secure the house, get valuations. No decisions have been made." Lydia finally abandoned the lid. "We're not putting it on the market tomorrow." Mara looked from one to the other. "But you're putting it on the market." Lydia's face changed by half an inch. "The house deserves someone who can maintain it properly," she said. Mara thought of Lydia opening the west drawing room curtains that morning and telling a mourner she remembered playing piano there. The piano had been sold before Lydia turned 10. Mara had seen the receipt. She rose, took her coffee to the sink, and poured it out. "I'm going upstairs." Grant stood too. "Mara, we should establish a timeline." "For what?" "For your transition." The word followed her into the hall. That night she slept in the room she had shared with Daniel for 18 years. On his side of the bed, the sheet was smooth. Lydia had suggested changing the linens before the funeral guests arrived, and Mara had said no so sharply that Lydia backed into the dresser. At 2 a.m, the heating pipes ticked inside the wall. Daniel had hated that sound once his tremor worsened. On bad nights, every unexpected noise seemed to pass through him. Mara would place one hand flat on his chest and count slowly, not because counting cured anything, but because it gave them both a job. Near dawn, she opened his bedside drawer, reading glasses, hand cream, a packet of tissues, the small notebook in which she had recorded his medication times until his handwriting became too uncertain to trust. No final message, no envelope with her name. Daniel had spent the last months apologizing for needing help and refusing to discuss dying. She had allowed that refusal because there was always another immediate task. At breakfast, Grant had already begun an inventory. Blue stickers marked furniture he believed had belonged to his mother. Yellow stickers marked items requiring appraisal. Lydia walked from room to room with a legal pad, writing descriptions in careful script. "Federal sideboard," she murmured as Mara passed. "It's a reproduction." Lydia frowned. "Dad said it was federal." "Your father also said the greenhouse boiler was from the Titanic." "From the library," Grant called. "What?" "Nothing," Lydia said. For one brief second, her mouth twitched. Then she wrote reproduction in parentheses. The greenhouse boiler had, in fact, failed twice that week. Mara needed to inspect it, but condolences kept arriving, followed by paperwork from the hospice and the funeral home. The estate lay under a hard glaze of ice. Downhill behind the mansion, the greenhouse roof shone white in the morning sun. Mara could see 3 newly cracked panes from the kitchen window. "I need to get down there," she said. Grant followed her gaze. "Not on the ice. The heater's unreliable. There's nothing growing in January. There's plenty growing in January. Most of it is simply doing it slowly. We'll have someone assess the structure." "Who?" "I'll find a contractor. You need a glazier who understands old steel frames. Owen Shaw does." Grant wrote the name in his phone, giving the impression that knowledge became legitimate only after passing through his hands. Mara went to the pharmacy that afternoon to return Daniel's unopened medication packets. The pharmacist, a woman she had known for 12 years, placed both hands around Mara's and said, "You don't have to do this today. If I don't do it today, they'll sit in my purse for 6 months. That's allowed. I need my purse." They both laughed, and the laugh left Mara suddenly dizzy. She steadied herself against the counter until it passed. When she drove back to Briarwood, Grant's rented sedan was parked near the front steps. A locksmith's van was pulling away. Mara climbed out slowly. Cold air caught in her throat. She carried the empty pharmacy bag to the front door and inserted her key. It stopped halfway. She tried again, though the first attempt had told her everything. Grant opened the door from inside. Behind him, Lydia stood in the hall holding Mara's green scarf. She must have taken it from the mudroom sleeve. "What did you do?" Mara asked. Grant stepped onto the stone landing and drew the door nearly closed behind him, as if protecting the house from weather. "The attorney advised us to secure the property." "From me?" "From unauthorized access. I live here. This is exactly why we needed a timeline." Mara looked past his shoulder. Cardboard boxes lined the hall. Her boxes. One was labeled Mara. Personal, in Lydia's handwriting. Grant lowered his voice. "The inn in town has a room. I paid through Friday." For one bewildering moment, his preparation hurt more than the lock. "You arranged a hotel before I left?" "I arranged an option. You changed the locks. I secured an estate asset." Mara took out her phone and photographed him standing in the doorway. Then she photographed the new lock, the locksmith's van disappearing down the drive, and the boxes behind him. Grant blinked. "What are you doing?" "Establishing a timeline." Lydia closed her eyes. Mara did not push past them. She requested her purse, medication, toiletries, 2 changes of clothes, Daniel's ring, and her file containing the marriage certificate. Lydia brought each item out. She had packed Mara's brown gardening gloves, too, wrapping them in tissue paper as if they were heirloom silver. Before Mara left, she pointed downhill. "My plants." "They're not going anywhere," Grant said. "They can freeze where they are." After a long exchange conducted mostly through Grant's jaw, he agreed she could enter the greenhouse the following afternoon to remove whatever belonged personally to her. One visit. He wanted a written list. The next day dawned clear after another night of sleet. Mara spent the morning at the inn's little desk, listing plants from memory, crossing out anything Daniel had purchased, though no one else could have distinguished his plants from hers. By late afternoon, she was alone inside the greenhouse, repairing a split irrigation line before she began moving stock. The loose brick knocked beneath her knee. Now the metal box sat open on the floor beside the amber lamp. Mara removed the folded document and brushed dust from its edge. The first page bore Daniel's full name and a date from 2023. At the bottom was his familiar, laborious signature. Below it were 2 names she did not recognize. Mara turned the final page and saw the attorney's certification. Helen Price. She had met Helen once, 3 winters ago, when Daniel claimed they were discussing a boundary question. Mara reached for her phone, then stopped. First she read what Daniel had done. The document was 12 pages long, though only 4 contained provisions Mara understood on the first reading. Daniel revoked his previous wills. He appointed Helen Price as executor, with a named substitute if Helen declined. He left personal bequests that were modest and ordinary: his father's watch to Grant, his mother's silver service to Lydia, several donations to organizations Mara recognized. The mansion, its formal grounds, and the bulk of the estate went equally to Grant and Lydia. Mara read that paragraph twice. It hurt less than she expected. Briarwood had always looked backward. Every room contained some earlier Ellison demanding to be remembered. Then she reached the property description attached as Schedule A, the greenhouse, the brick potting room, the gardener's cottage, the separate well, 2.4 acres bounded by an old stone wall on the east and the service lane on the west. The description granted permanent access from the county road and the right to maintain electrical and fuel connections necessary for reasonable use of the structures. All to Mara, outright. She sat back on her heels. Daniel had once joked that the greenhouse would be her glass alimony if she ever got tired of him. He had been standing at the potting table trying to fill seed trays with hands that no longer obeyed him. Half the soil landed on the floor. Mara told him no court in America would award her a building that consumed that much propane. She could hear his answer as clearly as if he were behind her. Then you'll have to make it earn its keep. A crack sounded overhead. Mara looked up sharply, but it was only ice releasing from an exterior brace and sliding down the glass. She read the signature page again. Daniel Ellison. His writing? Slow but recognizable. 2 witness signatures beneath his. A notarized self-proving affidavit followed, carrying Helen Price's seal and the same 2023 date. Mara did not understand enough to know whether it was valid. She understood enough not to leave it under the floor. She placed the document on the potting table, still folded as she had found it, and photographed the box inside the shallow space. She photographed the lifted paver, the table legs, the irrigation pipe, and the surrounding floor. Then she photographed each item as she removed it. The greenhouse survey was there, folded into a cloudy plastic sleeve. So were the well permit, an old electrical diagram, and 3 narrow planting ledgers held together with a rubber band that broke at her touch. At the bottom lay a white envelope with Helen Price printed in Daniel's unsteady block letters. The envelope was empty. Mara called the number listed beneath Helen's certification. A recorded voice said the office had closed permanently and directed former clients to another firm. She tried the personal number Daniel had written beside Helen's name in the margin of an old address book she kept on her phone. A woman answered after 5 rings. Yes? Is this Helen Price? Who's asking? Mara Ellison. Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. Helen said, Where are you calling from? The greenhouse. Another silence, shorter this time. Are you alone? Mara looked through the frosted panes toward the mansion. No one was crossing the service courtyard. Grant's car was near the kitchen wing, though he had promised not to interfere with her allotted afternoon. Yes. What have you found? Mara rested her hand on the document. Daniel's will. Helen released a breath that crackled through the phone. Tell me exactly where it was. Mara did. Have you removed it from the box? Yes. Don't unfold it any further. Don't remove any fasteners, don't write on it, and for heaven's sake, don't put it back. I wasn't planning to. I also advised Daniel not to put it wherever he apparently put it. He assured me he had a secure place. Daniel thought the vegetable drawer was a secure place for his wallet. I was not his neurologist. Despite everything, Mara laughed. It escaped harshly in the cold room. Helen's voice softened. Did he ever tell you he changed his will? No. Did you ask him to? No. Did you know he came to see me in 2023? He said there was a boundary question. There was. Then there was more than that. Mara heard paper moving at Helen's end. Do you have a copy? She asked. I have a file copy, execution notes, correspondence, and a memorandum concerning his capacity and instructions. The original went home with him at his insistence. I thought he would put it in a fireproof cabinet, not beneath a brick. It was dry. I'm delighted by the quality of the brick. Mara looked again toward the mansion. Grant has an older will. I'm aware of the older instrument. He and Lydia changed the locks. Helen's papers stopped moving. When? Yesterday. Were you still residing there? I had been residing there for 18 years. I'll take that as a yes. They packed my clothes and paid for an inn through Friday. That was presumptuous. Grant calls it an option. I remember Grant. There were several ways Helen might have said that. She chose the driest. Listen carefully, she continued. This document does not make you the owner of anything tonight. It needs to be offered for probate. Its authenticity may be challenged. Daniel's condition will invite questions, even though Parkinson's disease by itself tells us nothing about testamentary capacity. I know what he understood. Good. Eventually, you may need to say so. Right now, I need you to preserve the document and avoid turning this into an argument in a frozen greenhouse. Mara glanced at the split irrigation line. I'm already in an argument with the greenhouse. That one may be more reasonable. Helen told her to place the will flat between 2 pieces of clean cardboard if available, keep it dry, and bring it to her home the following morning. She gave Mara an address outside Kingston and the name of an attorney still practicing in Rhinebeck. "I'm retired," Helen said, "properly retired. I grow terrible tomatoes and refuse to attend committee meetings. You're named executor." "I remember." "Does that mean you're coming out of retirement?" "It means Daniel has found a way to inconvenience me after death." "I'll review the file tonight." For the first time since Mara had unfolded the document, something inside her loosened. Not relief. Relief belonged to outcomes. This was simply the sensation of no longer being the only person who knew. A car door slammed uphill. Mara turned off the work lamp. Without its amber light, the potting room filled with blue-gray dusk. "Someone's here," she said. "Take the original with you. Take the supporting property records if they were stored in the same box, but inventory them. Leave the box and everything else as you found it after photographing it. Wouldn't taking papers look like theft? Taking your late husband's newly discovered original will directly to the drafting attorney is defensible. Concealing it or leaving it vulnerable is not. If asked, don't lie. Also, don't volunteer a legal interpretation you aren't qualified to make. I was a county horticulture assistant. Then discuss aphids." The call ended. Mara found 2 clean cardboard inserts in a shipment of plant labels. She laid the folded will between them and slid the bundle into her canvas document tote. The survey, well permit, electrical diagram, and ledgers went into a separate bag. She returned the empty envelope to the box, lowered the box into its shallow space, and set the loose paver over it without pressing it level. Footsteps crossed the brick floor of the main greenhouse. Grant appeared at the potting room doorway wearing polished shoes, wholly unsuited to ice. His gaze moved from Mara to the bags and then to the disassembled irrigation fitting. "I thought you were retrieving plants." "I am. You're repairing a pipe. It was split. That isn't your responsibility. Water tends to ignore ownership disputes." He looked at the turned-off lamp. "Why are you standing in the dark? You arrived before I could turn it back on." Grant reached beside the doorway and flipped the wall switch. Nothing happened. "The overheads are on the greenhouse circuit," Mara said. "The breaker trips when the heater starts. I'll have an electrician look at it." "When?" "I said I would." Mara switched the work lamp on again. Grant noticed the lifted edge of the paver but gave it no special attention. The floor had a dozen uneven bricks. He nodded toward her bags. "What's in those?" "Property records and my work files." "Estate property?" "Some may be." I photographed and inventoried what I removed. Grant's eyes sharpened. "Why?" "Because you asked for a written list." "That's not what I meant. It's what you said." He took 2 steps into the room and stopped beside the potting table. Up close, Mara saw a red line across his forehead where his funeral hat had pressed the day before. He had not shaved carefully. A patch beneath his jaw was darker than the rest. "Lydia thinks you should have another week at the inn," he said. "How generous of Lydia. She's trying to make this less painful." "Is she?" "Believe it or not, this is painful for us too." Mara picked up a wrench and turned back to the irrigation fitting. "I believe you," she said. The answer unsettled him more than accusation would have. He watched her hands. "Dad didn't want strangers in this house," he said after a moment. "Your broker will be disappointed. No broker has been hired." Lydia photographed the dining room at 7:30 this morning. She opened the drapes first because pictures look better in natural light. Grant stared at her. "The security system sends alerts to my phone," Mara explained. "Or it did until you changed the account password. She's documenting condition. She moved the oxygen concentrator out of the library before she took the picture." His mouth tightened. "Do you want it left there forever?" "No." The word came out quietly. Mara set down the wrench. The concentrator had hummed beside Daniel's chair for 11 months. She hated it. She hated the plastic tubing that caught under furniture, the distilled water bottles, the dents its wheels had made in the rug. She had wanted it gone before the funeral and had been unable to touch it. Grant looked away first. "There are things in the house you should have," he said. "Not everything needs to become a fight." "I requested my belongings. I mean things of Dad's. Your old will may have opinions about those, too. His expression closed again. We're following the documents we have. That sounds responsible. It is responsible. Mara bent to tighten the fitting. Grant remained in the doorway long enough to make helping awkward and leaving seem rude. Finally, he took off his wool coat and placed it over a bench. "Tell me what needs to be moved," he said. She looked at his shoes. "You'll fall. I can walk across a greenhouse. You nearly fell crossing the courtyard. You saw that? The glass works both ways." He sighed, removed his shoes, and stood in black dress socks on the brick floor. Mara almost told him to put them back on. Instead, she gave him a tray of dormant hellebores and pointed toward the transport rack near the side door. "Keep it level. They look dead. They're resting." "How can you tell?" "I pay attention." Grant carried the tray without answering. They worked for 40 minutes. He complained about the cold only once and dropped nothing. When the rack was full, Mara secured it inside her station wagon with old towels and cord. She kept the canvas document tote with her. At the service gate, Grant handed her a typed inventory form. She added the records and work files, signed her name, and gave him a photograph of the page rather than the original. "You've become very cautious," he said. Mara opened the driver's door. "You've become very surprised by it." The in-room smelled of lemon cleaner and overheated carpet. Mara placed the will on the little desk, sat beside it, and called the attorney Helen had recommended. She reached voicemail. Then she called Owen Shaw. He answered over the clang of something metal. "Mara? I heard about Daniel. I'm sorry, thank you." There was no graceful way to move from death to broken glass, so she did not try. "I need a greenhouse assessment," she said. "Several panes cracked in the ice storm, the lower frames are rusting, and the heat isn't reliable." "At Briarwood?" "Yes." "Grant called me this morning." Mara looked at the cream document between the cardboard sheets. What did he ask? How much it would cost to make the structure safe before demolition? The room's heater clicked off. Mara heard with sudden clarity the small traffic sounds beyond the inn window. "And what did you tell him?" "That I don't price demolition. I repair greenhouses." She put one hand over Daniel's signature. "Good," she said. "I may need you to do exactly that." Owen's metal clanging stopped. "May?" he repeated. "There's a later will. That sentence usually causes expensive lunches. It gives me the greenhouse parcel." He was quiet long enough that Mara wondered whether the call had dropped. "The whole service parcel?" he asked. "The greenhouse, potting room, cottage, well, lane, and 2.4 acres, assuming the document holds up, and assuming the building holds up. That too." Something metallic scraped at Owen's end. She pictured his nursery workshop, every surface burdened with glass cutters, gasket samples, seed catalogs, and coffee cups he refused to throw away. "Grant told me the frames were beyond repair," he said. "Have you inspected them?" "No." "Then he told you what he hopes." "I told him I'd inspect before giving any opinion. He said he'd get back to me." Mara looked at the will. "Can you come tomorrow? Can you get me onto the property?" She hesitated. "That sounded like a no," Owen said. "The locks were changed." "I heard." "From Grant?" "From 3 people who didn't get the details right and 1 who enjoyed getting them wrong. Rhinebeck was large enough to pretend it did not gossip, and small enough that the pretense required effort." "I'm meeting the attorney who drafted the will in the morning," Mara said. "I'll call you after. I have a delivery at 11, but I can be there by 1. Don't promise until I know we can enter." "I'm not promising. I'm reserving the opportunity to disappoint you." "That sounds more like you." After they hung up, Mara called the front desk and asked whether the room was available beyond Friday. It was, at a rate $12 higher because the weekend had begun filling. "How many nights?" the clerk asked. Mara stared at the wall above the desk. A framed photograph showed autumn leaves reflected in a pond. Hudson Valley inns displayed October all year, as if winter were an administrative error. 3 more, she said. She gave her credit card number and wrote the amount in the small notebook she had started beside Daniel's medication logs. Lodging, meals, gas, attorney. Until that week, she had known exactly what each month would cost. Uncertainty seemed to charge by the hour. She slept badly and woke before the alarm with one cheek creased from the coverlet. The will remained on the desk between its cardboard protectors. She checked it before brushing her teeth, then felt foolish for checking again before leaving. Helen Price lived in a low cedar-sided house on a wooded road outside Kingston. 2 ceramic pots beside the steps held collapsed tomato vines beneath caps of ice. Mara rang the bell at 8:57. A compact woman with cropped white hair opened the door wearing navy slacks, a burgundy cardigan, and gardening clogs. She looked past Mara toward the driveway before letting her in. "You came alone. You told me to." People frequently treat instructions as conversation. Helen led her into a dining room converted into an office. Bankers' boxes occupied 2 walls. On the table sat a legal pad, a magnifying lamp, and a thick file labeled Ellison. Daniel R. Mara placed the cardboard bundle beside it. Helen put on cotton gloves, then gave Mara a sharp look. "These are for avoiding skin oils, not theater. I didn't say anything. You thought it. I thought they looked warm." Helen's mouth moved at one corner. She examined each page, compared signatures, studied the staple and notary seal, then opened her file and laid a photocopy beside the original. For several minutes, the only sound was the radiator knocking. "This is the instrument we executed," she said. "No substituted pages, no obvious damage, same staple positions as the file copy." Mara sat across from her. "So it's valid. It appears properly executed. Validity is a conclusion reached after anyone entitled to object has had an opportunity to make trouble. Grant is good at opportunities. Daniel mentioned that." Mara looked at the file. "What else did he mention?" Helen removed a yellow legal pad covered in tight handwriting. "He first contacted me about separating the greenhouse utilities and confirming access from the service lane. During that meeting, he asked what would happen under his existing will. I told him the mansion would pass to his children, subject to your rights as a surviving spouse, but the greenhouse was not separately devised. He never told me. He specifically asked that you not be involved." The words landed harder than Mara expected. Helen saw it. He was trying to avoid an undue influence argument. He was also private to the point of foolishness. He lied about why he came here. Yes. Mara looked out the window. A squirrel worked at the frozen soil beneath a feeder with furious optimism. Did he think I would talk him out of it? I don't know. He said you would worry the gift was too expensive to maintain. That sounded like Daniel. The lie still did too. Helen turned several pages. I met with him alone twice. On the day of execution, he identified his property, his family, the old will, and the effect of the changes. He explained that he wanted Grant and Lydia to have Briarwood because it was their family home. He wanted you to have a residence and a workable asset independent from them. Workable is generous. It was his word. I challenged it. He became irritated and gave me a 10-minute lecture on propagation. Mara's throat tightened. He was having a good day. He needed additional time to move and sign. His speech was quiet. His thinking was clear. Who witnessed it? Ruth Calder, my former office manager, and Samuel Ortiz, an accountant whose office was across the hall. Neither received anything under the will. Both signed the self-proving affidavit. Ruth is in Albany now. Samuel is still local. Helen tapped 2 pages clipped to the back of the file. These are their contact details and my execution memorandum. That is evidence, not a guarantee. Grant and Lydia can question Daniel's capacity, allege influence, challenge the property description, or simply make every procedural step unpleasant. What do they gain? They already have the mansion, control, sale value, an uncomplicated parcel, emotional vindication. People spend surprising amounts proving that a dead parent loved them correctly. Mara folded her hands to keep from touching Daniel's signature. What happens today? I contact the attorney representing Grant and Lydia and notify him that a later original has been found. I also contact the lawyer I referred you to. She can prepare the probate petition and address your lockout. I can't afford a war. Most people can't. That doesn't prevent wars. Helen closed the file. Before we discuss cost, tell me what is in the greenhouse. Living stock, tools, records, a failing heater. How long before damage? It may already have started. Tonight is forecast below 10. Helen picked up her telephone. Then we begin with the thing that cannot wait for court. Grant's attorney answered on the second transfer. Helen identified herself, said she had possession of Daniel's 2023 original will, and requested written assurance that nothing on the devised parcel would be removed, destroyed, disconnected, or altered. She listened, expressionless. "No," she said. "Mrs. Ellison will not agree to stay away from the greenhouse while her property claim is evaluated by your clients." Another pause. She was Daniel's wife, not an exotic fungus discovered after closing. Mara lowered her eyes to hide a startled smile. Helen continued, "Mr. Ellison contacted a contractor about demolition before obtaining an inspection. I suggest everyone avoid conduct that looks worse in a transcript than it sounded on the telephone." The attorney spoke at length. Helen wrote 3 words on her pad: 1 p.m. access. "Grant may attend," she said. "He may not obstruct an emergency assessment. Send confirmation by email." When she hung up, Mara asked, "Did he agree?" "He agreed Grant will unlock the service gate at 1. He did not agree with my description of the circumstances. You made it sound like I'm already entitled to the greenhouse. No, I made it sound like damaging disputed property is a bad idea." Helen slid a photocopy of the will across the table, keeping the original. "Do not discuss Daniel's capacity with Grant or Lydia. Do not argue about what Daniel meant. Do not sign inventories, waivers, access agreements, or anything else they place in front of you. What if it's a receipt for a sandwich? Read it first." Mara left with the property, records, and planting ledgers. The original remained in Helen's locked fireproof cabinet where Daniel should have left it 3 years earlier. Owen's truck was waiting beside the service gate when Mara arrived at Briarwood. Long wooden racks extended over its cab, and the side panel bore the faded words, "Shaw Glasshouse Nursery." Owen stood near the hood in an orange knit cap, studying the mansion uphill. At 62, he had a narrow face, a gray beard trimmed close, and the permanently roughened fingertips of someone who handled glass without trusting gloves. He held out a paper cup. "Coffee," he said. "It's bad, but it's hot." Mara accepted it. "That's an honest business model." Grant opened the gate at exactly 1. He wore boots this time. His dark coat was zipped to the throat, and a folded document protruded from one pocket. "Mr. Shaw," he said, "I wasn't informed Mara would be present for the inspection." Owen looked at Mara, then back at Grant. "She informed me. This assessment is for the estate." "No," Mara said. "Your assessment was for demolition. This one is for stabilization." Grant removed the document from his pocket. "Before anyone enters, I need both of you to acknowledge that access doesn't concede ownership." Helen's warning was less than an hour old. Mara did not take the paper. "Owen isn't claiming ownership," she said. "I'm fond of greenhouses," Owen added, "but I've never tried to marry one." Grant ignored him. "My attorney says you found a purported will. A later original will has been delivered to the drafting attorney." "Purported," Grant repeated. Mara looked toward the greenhouse. Frost still filmed the shaded panes, but sunlight had begun loosening ice along the roof. "Your father's plants are inside. This is not about plants. It is for the next hour." Lydia appeared in the service courtyard, walking carefully over the ice in a camel-colored coat. She stopped when she saw Mara. "You found a will under the floor?" Grant's head turned sharply. He had apparently not told her where. Mara said, "Who told you that?" Grant's attorney said there was an issue involving documents discovered in the greenhouse. "I called Helen." "And Helen told you?" "She told me to speak to my own lawyer." "That sounds like Helen." Lydia looked past Mara at the old structure. "What does it say?" Grant stepped between them without seeming to. "We're not discussing that here." "You know, though," Lydia said to him. I know what counsel told me. Which is more than you told me. Owen cleared his throat. Tonight's low is 8 degrees. If we're having a family meeting, I'm going to start without you. He walked through the gate carrying his tool case. Mara followed. Behind her, Grant said Lydia's name in warning, and Lydia answered, "Don't manage me." Inside, the greenhouse smelled of wet brick, mineral soil, and cold metal. Meltwater ticked into buckets beneath 2 cracked panes. Owen moved slowly down the central aisle, touching frame joints, examining rust at the base, and photographing each failure. He said little until they reached the boiler room. The heater coughed awake, ran for 17 seconds, and shut down. Owen waited. It tried again, producing a low rattle that Mara felt through the soles of her boots. "Fuel line?" she asked. "Partly. Ignition's inconsistent. Heat exchanger may be worse." "How much?" "I don't give prices before I know what I'm pricing." "Roughly. Roughly is how people end up hating me." Grant and Lydia entered behind them, bringing cold air through the door. Owen removed his cap and rubbed one hand over his hair. "You cannot heat the whole structure tonight," he said. "Not safely and not cheaply. We close off the north 2 bays, move vulnerable stock toward the potting room, hang thermal curtains, and use temporary electric heat where the wiring can carry it." Grant crossed his arms. "Who pays?" "I will," Mara said. "With what authority?" "With a credit card." Owen glanced between them. "I need to inspect the panel before anybody buys heaters." The panel was mounted in the potting room. When Mara opened its metal door, Owen leaned close, tracing the labeled circuits with one finger. Greenhouse lights, well pump, cottage, heater controls. He looked toward the conduit running uphill. Main feed comes from the mansion, but these branches are separate. Mara handed him the old electrical diagram from the deed box. Owen unfolded it across the potting table. Grant stepped nearer despite himself. Lydia remained by the doorway, staring at the loose paver beneath the table. "This is where you found it," she said. Mara did not answer. Lydia crouched, pressed one gloved finger to the brick, and looked up with an expression Mara could not name. "He hid it from us." The accusation was quiet enough to sound like grief. Mara met her eyes. "He hid it from me, too." For a moment, Lydia's face lost its careful arrangement. Then Grant said, "That doesn't prove anything." Owen tapped the electrical diagram. "It proves the cottage outlet and the South Bay outlets share a 20-amp circuit, which is a terrible idea if anyone intends to plug in a kettle." Grant stared at him. "I'm trying to keep us from freezing plants or burning down disputed property," Owen said. "You're welcome." He sketched a temporary plan on the back of an invoice. One electric heater could run from the potting room circuit. A second could use an exterior connection near the well, provided the outlet tested properly. Thermal curtains would reduce the space they needed to protect, and horticultural fleece could cover the benches closest to the cracked panes. "How much for tonight?" Mara asked. $780, assuming I get my curtains back and nobody asks me to work past sunrise. Grant gave a short laugh. "For blankets and 2 heaters? For commercial thermal curtains, safe heaters, delivery, setup, and the expertise to prevent you from plugging both into the same circuit." "I can pay it," Mara said. "That isn't the point. It's exactly the point." Grant turned to her. "You're spending money on an estate asset you may not inherit. I'm spending money on plants I already own in a structure Daniel intended me to have. You don't know what he intended." Lydia rose from beside the paver. "Apparently she does." Grant looked at her. "You haven't read the document. Neither have you. I've spoken with counsel. That's not the same thing." Mara saw the old rhythm between them. Grant gathering control, Lydia punishing him for gathering it before she could. Daniel used to call it their revolving argument because either one could occupy either side. Owen rolled up the electrical diagram. "If you want this done, I need an answer now. My employee leaves at 4, and the curtains are in a storage barn 25 minutes away." Mara took out her credit card. Grant stepped toward her. At least wait until the lawyers determine whether you have access. Cole doesn't wait for lawyers. She gave Owen the card. He did not reach for it immediately. You understand this is triage. It won't repair the heater or the glass. I understand. The stock may still take damage. I understand. And I'll need you to sign that I said both of those things. You and Helen would get along. Does she pay invoices? Probably after reading them. Owen took the card and went to his truck. Grant made a call in the service courtyard. He paced while speaking, his free hand cutting the air as though the person on the other end could see his objections. Lydia stayed in the greenhouse. She walked along the dormant benches, touching nothing. Her camel coat looked too clean against the old steel and mineral-streaked glass. Grant says the new will gives you all of this, she said. The defined parcel. And the cottage. Yes, the service lane cuts along the west lawn. It has for nearly a century. It was part of the estate. It still will be, just not part of your parcel. Lydia looked toward the mansion through the glass. Dad always said Briarwood should remain whole. He said many things before he had to decide what they meant. That sounds convenient. Mara picked up an empty propagation tray and slid it beneath a drip. The mansion and formal grounds still go to you and Grant, with a commercial lane beside them, with a narrow service lane that already exists, and separate utilities, a separate well, defined electrical and fuel rights. You've memorized it quickly. I read it slowly. Lydia's gaze returned to the loose paver. Did you know where he kept papers? Not there. You expect me to believe you happened to lift the exact brick covering a will that benefits you? Mara pointed to the irrigation pipe beneath the table. Its split fitting was still open, the wrench beside it. I was fixing that. Why, if you were only here to collect plants, because water was leaking, that's not an answer. It has been my answer to most things for 18 years. Lydia flinched, then hid it by turning toward the nearest bench. A row of camellias stood there in large clay pots, leaves dulled by cold. My mother planted one of those, she said. Your mother planted the oldest one. Daniel added 2 more after you went away to college. I propagated the smaller plants from all 3. Lydia bent toward a label. Which is hers? The one by the column. The old camellia had grown broad and awkward, too heavy for Mara to move alone. Lydia crossed to it and examined the trunk. We should take it up to the house. It won't survive the drawing room. I meant eventually. It belongs in a greenhouse. Lydia straightened. Everything belongs where you say it belongs. No. Plants are usually clear about their requirements. And people lie. Owen returned with another man from his nursery, an adult named Dale, who spoke only to ask where things went. They unloaded 2 rolled curtains, heaters, cables, fleece, and a testing meter. Work displaced the argument. Mara began shifting the most vulnerable stock toward the potting room. Owen assigned Grant to clear the central aisle after Grant's phone call ended without producing an injunction against thermal curtains. Lydia removed her coat, folded it over a chair, and helped Mara wrap the old camellia. She did not ask permission. She took the opposite side of the fleece and held it too high. Lower, Mara said. Lydia lowered it. Not that much. You could say the correct height the first time. I could if I knew how long your arms were. Lydia gave her a look, but adjusted the fabric. Together they worked it beneath the lowest branches without snapping them. Lydia's hands were careful. Grant carried stacks of empty trays past them. You don't need to do that. I'm aware, Lydia said. By dusk, the north 2 bays were isolated behind silver-gray curtains. The heaters ran on separate tested circuits. Owen placed temperature sensors at bench height and connected them to an application on Mara's phone. If it drops below 38, you'll get an alert, he said. The plants can tolerate lower. The pipes can't. Also, I like margins. He inspected the lower steel frames once more, pressing a screwdriver against the worst rust. Flakes fell onto the brick. Well, Mara asked. There's loss at several bases. 3 braces need replacement. More after we remove corrosion and see what's left. Beyond repair? No. The word crossed the greenhouse and reached Grant. Owen continued. Beyond cheap repair? That's different. How different? Mara asked. For the first phase? Glass replacement, frame stabilization, heater work, weather sealing, somewhere between $18,000 and $26,000. That's before surprises. Mara felt the figure settle into her chest. Her savings could cover it, but only by consuming the money she had expected to use for rent, legal fees, and the rest of her life. The greenhouse had no operating income. Even the plants she owned were mostly stock, valuable only if she kept them alive long enough to propagate. Grant folded his arms. Demolition would be less. Not necessarily, Owen said. Old glass and steel have disposal costs, and the attached brick room complicates equipment access. I asked whether demolition would be less. You asked me to tell you the building couldn't be repaired. It can. Lydia put her coat back on. Can it be made attractive? She asked. Owen looked around at the frosted glass, the aged ribs, and the orderly benches under fleece. It already is. That isn't what I mean. I know. Grant locked the service gate after Owen's truck left. Mara requested a key or code for emergency access. He refused until the attorneys agreed on written terms. If the temperature alarm goes off, she asked, call me. And if you don't answer, I'll answer. Mara looked at Lydia. Lydia buttoned her coat. Call both of us. At the inn, Mara ate soup from a cardboard container while speaking with Rachel Kim, the probate attorney Helen had recommended. Rachel's voice was brisk but not hurried. She had already reviewed Helen's scanned file and believed the will had strong, formal support. Strong did not mean uncontested. Grant and Lydia are distributees under the earlier will and beneficiaries under this one, Rachel explained. They'll receive notice. If they object, we may need document production, depositions, medical records, and testimony from the witnesses. How long? If no one fights, months. If they fight, longer. How expensive? Rachel gave her a retainer figure of $4,500 and warned that litigation could exceed it several times over. Mara wrote the number beneath the inn charges. The money had been meant for replacing her car and repairing the roof of whatever modest house she imagined she might rent or buy. Now she was paying to prove that her dead husband had intended what he signed. Can we address the lockout? She asked. Yes, your rights as a surviving spouse exist independently of the later will, but immediate possession of the mansion and preservation of the devised parcel are related, not identical, questions. What do you want first? The answer should have been her home. Her clothes were still boxed in its hall. Mara looked at the temperature display on her phone. Access to the greenhouse, she said. The first alarm sounded at 2:17 in the morning. Mara came awake with the phone vibrating beneath her hand. 37 degrees. Before she could sit fully upright, the number changed to 36. She called Grant. The call went to voicemail. She called again while pulling on her trousers. No answer. Lydia picked up on the 4th ring. What happened? She said, her voice thick with sleep. The temperature is dropping. One of the heaters may have tripped a breaker. Can it wait until morning? No. A pause. I'll open the gate. When Mara reached Briarwood, Lydia was waiting in boots and a long navy coat thrown over flannel pajamas. Her hair was tied badly at the back of her neck. She carried a flashlight and a ring of keys. Grant sleeps with earplugs, she said. Of course he does. That sounded like criticism. It was envy. They crossed the service courtyard carefully. Inside the potting room, the work lamp still glowed, but one heater was dead. Mara checked the panel. The breaker had tripped. She reset it. The heater started, then tripped the circuit again. Don't keep doing that, Lydia said. I wasn't planning to. Mara called Owen. He answered with a grunt, listened, and told her to unplug the heater and check the exterior cord for moisture. Lydia held the flashlight while Mara traced the line. Meltwater had reached the connection where the cord entered beneath the door. They disconnected it, dried the area, and moved the second heater to a safe outlet Owen identified over the phone. Then they added fleece to the most exposed benches and waited. 35 degrees, then 36. Lydia stood beside her mother's camellia with both hands in her coat pockets. "Grant didn't tell me about demolition," she said. Mara watched the number rise to 37. "He called it making the structure safe. That's what he always does. Give something a name you can't object to." Mara looked at her. Lydia's face was pale with cold and fatigue. "I'm not saying the will is valid. No, I'm saying he should have told me." The temperature reached 38. Up the hill, every window of the mansion was dark. Lydia touched the fleece around the camellia, checking the fold Mara had shown her. Did Dad really understand what he was giving you? Helen's warning returned. Do not discuss Daniel's capacity. Mara closed the electrical panel. You'll have the chance to ask the people who were there. Lydia did not press. They remained in the potting room until the temperature held at 39 for 10 minutes. The work lamp softened the hard lines of her face. Without makeup and deliberate posture, she looked less like the guardian of Briarwood and more like someone who had awakened in the wrong life. Dad used to bring me down here when I couldn't sleep, she said. Mara checked the heater cord again. He came down here when he couldn't sleep. You probably followed him. That sounds less sentimental. It may still have been good. Lydia considered this. He let me water things. That was brave of him. I drowned a fern once. Most people do. Ferns encourage guilt. A breath of laughter escaped Lydia before she stopped it. She touched the fleece covering the camellia, then withdrew her hand. When did he decide? She asked. About the will? Lydia nodded. I don't know. Did something happen? Many things happened. You know what I mean? Mara did. Lydia wanted a single injury, one bad telephone call or forgotten visit she could examine and defend. The truth was made of smaller pieces. Grant ending calls when Daniel's speech slowed, Lydia promising to visit and canceling, both of them sending expensive devices that required Mara to set up and Daniel to pretend to use. There had also been good visits, private jokes, birthday dinners, and the afternoon Grant spent 4 hours fixing a loose stair rail because Daniel no longer trusted his balance. Nothing had happened cleanly enough to blame. He didn't disinherit you, Mara said. That isn't what I asked. No. Lydia lifted the flashlight from the table. I'm going back up. At the gate, she gave Mara the temporary code, making her repeat it once before deleting it from the display. Grant will change it in the morning, she said. He said he'd answer. He believed he would. The distinction stayed with Mara on the drive to the inn. She slept until 8:30 and woke to 5 missed calls. 2 were from Rachel Kim, 1 from Owen, and 2 from Grant. Grant's voicemail began without greeting. You had no authorization to enter the property in the middle of the night. Lydia was not entitled to grant access unilaterally. If there is another emergency, you contact me and wait for instruction. His second message was 9 seconds long. I understand you did contact me. That does not change the access issue. Mara saved both. Owen arrived at the greenhouse before 10 with a weatherproof connector, a replacement cable, and a breakfast sandwich wrapped in foil. Grant had changed the gate code, but Rachel had already negotiated access from 10 to 4, while the parties prepared a temporary preservation agreement. Grant watched them enter. He said nothing about the voicemail. The damaged connector took Owen 12 minutes to replace. The heater itself was functional. He checked every cable, raised each connection off the floor, and wrote the date directly on strips of white tape. Temporary means temporary, he told Mara. These can keep one protected section above freezing. They are not a heating system. What would you fix first if it were yours? The frame bases. No point installing perfect glass in a structure losing its feet, and after that, heat but smaller. Trying to restore the old system for the whole house will eat fuel, divide the growing zones permanently, and heat only what earns money. Grant stood near the doorway, listening despite pretending to answer email. Mara opened Daniel's planting ledgers on the potting table. The earliest entries were in his quick slanted handwriting, Later pages alternated between Mara's notes and Daniel's increasingly uneven numbers. They had tracked germination, losses, temperatures, bloom dates, and purchases. They had not tracked labor because it had never occurred to either of them to count hers. "What can earn money in winter?" she asked. Owen leaned over the pages. "Not nostalgia. I don't plan to sell that." "Good. Market's saturated." He pointed to several entries. Hellebores, forced narcissus, hardy culinary starts, cold-tolerant greens for restaurants, though producing them consistently would require food handling considerations and more heat than the greenhouse could presently guarantee. "You know propagation," he said. "That's the advantage. The disadvantage is every nursery around here knows you know propagation and will expect wholesale prices. I'd rather have small, reliable orders than strangers wandering through the property, especially while the lane is disputed. The lane is described. Everything is disputed until someone tires of paying to dispute it." Grant put his phone away. "You're discussing commercial use of land she doesn't own." Owen straightened. "We're discussing whether a greenhouse can support commercial use. It can, not without permits, insurance, parking, and capital." Mara looked at Grant. "You've researched it." "I researched liabilities. You called Owen about demolition before you had authority to demolish. The structure is dangerous." Owen glanced up at the steel ribs. "It needs repair. Dangerous is a different report and costs extra." Grant ignored him. "My attorney has reviewed the will." "And?" "The property description cuts through utility systems that serve the main house. The access language is broad. Dad never would have agreed to that if he understood the consequences." Mara closed the ledger. He had the service parcel surveyed. In 2019, before his condition became severe, the well has always served the greenhouse and cottage. The electrical feed originates at the mansion, and the will provides essential utility rights. Grant's jaw tightened. "You have memorized those too. Only the parts you keep threatening." Owen carried his tools toward the boiler room. He did not hurry, but he gave them the dignity of an argument without an audience. Grant lowered his voice. "The mansion loses value if the greenhouse is carved out. It was never included in your older will by name either. It was part of the estate. It still is until probate. You know what I mean." Mara almost pointed out how frequently that phrase had appeared since Daniel's funeral. Instead, she waited. Grant looked older than he had in the kitchen. Anger did not suit the fine skin around his eyes. "You expect us to believe you knew nothing," he said. "Dad secretly meets with a lawyer, orders a survey description, signs a new will giving you the only part of Briarwood you ever cared about, and hides the original in the room where you work. The survey already existed. You knew about it. I helped arrange it when we had the well line repaired. So you were involved in repairing the well. You see how this looks?" "Yes." "You changed the locks on your father's widow and called a demolition contractor before the funeral flowers wilted. I see how many things look." His face colored. "The demolition question was preliminary. So was my conversation about hellebores." Grant walked out. Owen returned carrying a rusted burner component in a plastic tray. "I heard none of that," he said. "You were 12 feet away. I'm losing hearing at a professionally useful rate." He set the component on the table. The metal had split near one mounting point. "This is part of the ignition problem. I can source a replacement, but the heat exchanger still needs testing. Don't run the old boiler unattended." "How much?" "I'll bring you options. Affordable options. That means different things to different people. It means I paid $4,500 to an attorney this morning." Owen studied her, then nodded. "I'll bring the options people choose when they're spending their own money." At noon, Lydia came down carrying a cardboard box. "Your mail," she said. Mara wiped her hands before taking it. Envelopes, 2 magazines, a condolence card addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Ellison, and a renewal notice for the mansion's heating contract. "I don't need this one," Mara said, holding it out. Lydia did not take it. "Grant says all estate correspondence should remain at the house. It's addressed to me." Then open it and give him the estate portion. Mara set the box on a bench. Lydia watched Owen measure the corroded frames. "He says you can collect the rest of your belongings at 2, she said. "I'll help. I can pack myself. They're already packed. That is the problem." At 2, Mara entered Briarwood through the mud room because Grant would not give her a front door key. The house smelled faintly of furniture polish. Daniel's medical equipment was gone. So were the funeral flowers. Her boxes occupied the breakfast room now, labels facing outward. Clothes, books, bathroom, kitchen, personal. Lydia had wrapped Mara's everyday coffee mug in 3 sheets of tissue and placed Daniel's monogrammed crystal glasses loose beside it. "That will break," Mara said. Lydia looked into the box. "Grant packed those. Then they'll break responsibly." Lydia lifted each glass and wrapped it properly. Mara went upstairs. The bedroom no longer looked like the room in which Daniel had died because he had died at the hospital, but it was the room where dying had occupied them. The rails had been removed from the bed. His shoes were lined beneath the window. Her clothes had been taken from the closet, leaving a pale, empty section between Daniel's suits and jackets. On the dresser sat his wedding ring in the pharmacy's plastic bag. Mara picked it up. "I was going to find a better box," Lydia said from the doorway. "The bag is fine. It looks terrible. It's what the hospital used. That doesn't make it appropriate." Mara slipped the bag into her purse. Appropriate for what? Lydia glanced around the room. Keeping. Mara took the small medication notebook from the bedside drawer. Lydia's gaze followed it. "Are those his medical records?" "No, they're my notes. The attorneys may need them." Mara held the notebook against her palm. "Then they can request them." Something in Lydia's face sharpened. "You're already preparing to prove he was competent. I'm preparing not to let you take another thing from my hand because you've decided it belongs to the estate. We aren't thieves. I didn't call you thieves. You make everything sound worse than the words you use." Mara looked at Daniel's shoes. "He was clear most days," Lydia said. "I know that." The admission surprised them both, but he was also frightened, Lydia continued. "He hated needing you. He might have signed something because he thought you would leave." Mara turned. "I never threatened to leave him. You didn't have to. You were the person who controlled whether he got out of bed, whether he ate, whether he took his medication. That's power, Mara, even if you used it kindly." Mara felt the old notebook's wire edge press into her fingers. "Yes," she said, "it was." Lydia seemed unprepared for agreement. Mara carried the notebook downstairs. By 4, her station wagon was full, and 6 boxes remained. Grant said she could retrieve them after the preservation agreement was signed. Rachel called as Mara reached the inn. "They intend to object," she said. "Lack of capacity and undue influence, possibly improper execution if they find a factual basis." "Will they?" "Helen's file is strong. That doesn't prevent allegations." Mara sat behind the wheel with Daniel's ring in her purse and her life packed high enough to block the rear window. Rachel continued, "They've offered temporary daytime access to the greenhouse. No residents in the cottage yet. They also want you to pay all emergency operating costs. I'm already doing that, I know. The question is whether you can keep doing it." Through the windshield, snowmelt ran along the inn parking lot and disappeared into a drain. Mary thought of the repair range, the retainer, the room charges, and the old boiler component split at its mounting point. "For now," she said. Rachel was quiet. "Then we make sure 'for now' has numbers," she said. "Because that is how you keep it from becoming forever." Rachel's request for numbers produced an answer Mara disliked. After the attorney's retainer, the emergency greenhouse work, another week at the inn, and ordinary bills, Mara could spend $12,000 without touching the savings she considered untouchable. The distinction was emotional rather than mathematical. Money did not know whether it had been saved for a replacement car, a roof, or the humiliations of old age. The greenhouse required at least $18,000 in first-phase repairs. Mara spread the estimates across the in-bed. Owen had provided 3, each with handwritten arrows and warnings in the margins. The least expensive stabilized only the worst frame bases and replaced 6 panes. The middle option added boiler repairs and weather sealing. The third made the southern bays usable through the rest of winter. Beside them, she placed Helen's copy of the will, the temporary access agreement, and Rachel's projected legal costs. For years, she had managed Daniel's care by dividing impossible days into tasks. Get him sitting. Get his feet under him. Give the medication time to work. Do not think about the stairs until he is standing. She took out a pen. Make one bay safe. Protect existing stock. Create income before restoring anything ornamental. The following morning, Owen found her measuring the south bay. "You've moved the benches," he said. "Only the empty ones. You shouldn't move those alone." "I used rollers." That wasn't my objection. It was the objection I could answer. He gave her a sheet with revised figures. By salvaging glass from an unused cold frame, postponing work on the north bays, and replacing only structurally necessary frame sections, he could reduce immediate repairs to $6,800. A used high-efficiency unit from a nursery renovation might heat the protected zone for another $2,400, including installation, if it passed inspection. "And if it doesn't?" Mara asked. "Then we don't install it. You're charging $500 to inspect it. I'm charging for removal, transport, pressure testing, and the pleasure of meeting the man who owns it. Is he unpleasant? He raises orchids. It changes people." Mara signed the frame contract. Owen watched her write the deposit check. "You don't have to do every expensive thing this week. I'm not. You're looking at the boiler. I'm looking at the number. That's how expensive things begin." He folded the contract into his case, then opened one of Daniel's ledgers. Mara had marked the stock capable of division or propagation before spring. You still have the hellebore mothers, 23 viable, 3 questionable, and the winter time? Enough for 60 starter pots. If I take cuttings now, I can use 48. Mara looked up. "At your nursery, I have customers who ask for culinary starts before anyone sensible wants to grow them. What price?" He named a wholesale figure. "That's low. It's wholesale. It's low wholesale. It includes me supplying pots and mix. That makes it less insulting." I was aiming for mildly insulting. She calculated quickly. "Delivery when?" 6 weeks for the time. Hellebores at market size in March, if you can give me 30 uniform plants. I can give you 24. I asked for 30. And I told you what I can provide. Owen scratched out the number and wrote 24. "This is an order," he said, "not an encouragement. I don't need encouragement. Everyone needs encouragement. You don't need it disguised as a purchase." He handed her the page. The total would not repair a single major frame section, but it would pay the electric bill and buy propagation material. More importantly, it was a number entering rather than leaving. Mara signed. By the end of the week, Rachel had negotiated a temporary arrangement allowing Mara to live in the gardener's cottage while probate proceeded. Grant and Lydia insisted that the concession established no ownership right. Mara agreed to pay for her own heat and electricity and to enter the mansion only by appointment. The cottage stood beyond the potting room, partly screened by bare lilacs. It had 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a sitting room filled with estate storage. Rolled rugs, broken lamps, garden cushions, and 3 crates of china no one remembered owning. Grant unlocked it while Lydia recorded the condition on her phone. "The water was shut off in October," he said. "I know where the valve is. The chimney hasn't been inspected. The stove is decorative until it is. There may be mice. There are definitely mice." Grant looked around. "You can still use the inn. At my expense. We paid the first nights. After removing me from my home." Lydia lowered her phone. "Could we get through 1 room without doing this?" Mara opened the cabinet beneath the sink. Mouse droppings peppered the shelf. Apparently not this room. The plumbing held when Mara reopened the valve. The hot water tank groaned but worked. Owen helped move the heaviest storage into the potting room after making Mara promise not to call it free labor. Lydia brought down 2 lamps and a set of sheets from the mansion. "These are mine," Mara said. "Yes. Why weren't they in my boxes? They were in the laundry." Grant arrived carrying Daniel's old reading chair. Mara stopped him at the cottage door. "That belongs in the library. He spent the last 2 years sitting in it with you. He spent 30 years sitting in it before me." Grant adjusted his grip. "Do you want it or not?" Mara looked at the worn arms, the small stain where Daniel had spilled coffee, and blamed the dog they did not own. "Yes." Grant carried it inside and placed it near the window. "It doesn't fit," Lydia said. "It fits," Mara replied. "It blocks half the radiator." Grant moved it 3 inches. No one thanked anyone. Mara's first night in the cottage was colder and quieter than the inn. Her boxes made walls inside the small rooms. The refrigerator hummed. Pipes clicked. The greenhouse sensors glowed on her phone beside the bed. She woke twice to check them, and once because she thought she heard Daniel call her name. It was a branch dragging against the roof. In the morning, frost traced the inside edge of the bedroom window. Mara dressed in layers and walked the narrow path to the greenhouse, carrying coffee in her chipped, everyday mug. For the first time since Daniel's death, she did not need permission to reach the gate. The temporary agreement gave her a code valid from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. Rachel was still trying to obtain 24-hour emergency access. Grant objected on security grounds. The mansion's security, Rachel observed, did not extend downhill when the greenhouse pipes froze. Formal objections to the will arrived 2 days later. Rachel brought Mara a copy in the cottage. The filing alleged Daniel lacked testamentary capacity due to advanced Parkinson's disease and related cognitive decline. It alleged Mara had occupied a confidential and controlling position, isolated Daniel from his children, arranged the property survey, and benefited from a document executed without the family's knowledge. Mara read the word isolated 3 times. "They called him," she said. "I know. He refused some calls. Sometimes his voice was bad and he didn't want them hearing it. That distinction will matter. I encourage them to visit. Do you have messages?" "Some. Keep them. Don't organize them by deleting anything." Mara turned the page. The filing cited a hospital record from 6 weeks after the will was signed, noting intermittent confusion during treatment for a urinary infection. Mara remembered that night. Daniel had asked why the hospital kept moving the bathroom. He had also corrected a nurse who mispronounced Mara's last name, reminding her it was his too. "He was sick," she said. Rachel nodded. A later episode of confusion doesn't establish incapacity on the day of signing, but it gives them something to build around. Lydia admitted he was clear most days. "To you? In the bedroom? Was anyone else present?" "No." Rachel made a note anyway. "They're requesting medical records, financial records, communications between you and Helen, and information about the survey. We'll request their communications with Daniel and with each other concerning the estate." Mara looked at the list of allegations. "This makes it sound as if I arranged his entire life." "You did arrange much of his daily life." "That's what Lydia said. Caregiving creates power. It also creates proximity. Neither fact proves abuse." Mara set the papers down. Rachel's expression softened. "The unpleasant part is that they can take ordinary acts of care and ask suspicious questions about them." "Will I have to answer?" "Yes." "When?" "Not tomorrow. For now, we preserve records and prepare." After Rachel left, Mara went to the greenhouse and took time cuttings until her shoulders ached. Each one required the same small actions. Choose healthy growth, cut below the node, strip the lower leaves, place it in mix. Repetition did not feel empty when something might root. Owen's crew began framework the next Monday. They braced the southern wall, removed rusted sections, and fitted new steel at the bases. The work exposed uglier corrosion than the initial inspection had shown, adding $900 to the estimate. Mara approved $600 and postponed the rest. At noon, she drove to Rachel's office with Daniel's medication notebook and printed copies of messages. Her phone showed the greenhouse temperature holding at 43. During the meeting, the sensor went offline. Mara refreshed the application. Nothing. She called Grant. "The electrician is working on the mansion panel," he said. "Power will be restored shortly. You disconnected the greenhouse?" "The entire west side circuit had to be shut down." "You didn't tell me." Notice was sent to the attorneys. Rachel was already checking her email. "It arrived 28 minutes ago," she said. "How long?" Mara asked Grant. "An hour, perhaps 2. It's 14 degrees outside. The greenhouse has retained heat before, not with 6 panes temporarily removed for framework." Grant exhaled. "I'll speak to the electrician." Mara was already putting on her coat. By the time she reached Briarwood, power had been off for an hour and 12 minutes. Owen's crew had covered the open frames with plastic, but wind pushed cold beneath the edges. The protected bay had fallen below freezing. The hellebores would survive. The newly taken time cuttings would not. Mara touched one tray. The tender leaves had gone dark and limp. On the bench beside it, rooted geranium stock Daniel had kept for years sagged against frozen soil. Grant came down from the mansion as the power returned. The heaters started with a mechanical hum. "I told him to restore this circuit first," he said. Mara lifted a dead cutting between her fingers. "Thank you. It wasn't deliberate." "I know. I sent notice. To my lawyer after the power was off. I followed counsel's instruction." Mara looked at the ruined bench, then at the electrical conduit running uphill. For 6 years, she had scheduled her life around Daniel's body. Now every living thing she hoped to build from still depended on a switch in Grant's house. "Then your counsel can explain," she said, "why I need a separate feed." Grant looked at the dead bench. "I'll reimburse you." "From what?" "My own funds." "That doesn't restore them." "No, but it covers the loss." Mara picked up another time cutting. Its stem had turned translucent at the base. "How much is a plant worth before it becomes a plant?" Grant glanced toward the mansion, where the electrician's van stood near the kitchen wing. "Give me a figure." "You want a figure because figures can be paid. That's generally how reimbursement works. The geranium stock came from plants your father kept for 14 years. Then tell me what replacing it costs. It can't be replaced." Grant's face tightened. "I'm trying to take responsibility. Then start with what happened, not what it costs." Owen entered carrying a roll of insulation. He stopped when he saw the bench. "How long?" he asked. "More than an hour." He pressed a finger into one tray, then checked several stems. He did not offer false hope. "The time is gone. Maybe 2 of the mother geraniums recover if the roots stayed warm enough." "My order," Mara said. "We delay it. You needed delivery in 6 weeks. I needed live plants in 6 weeks. These won't be." Grant said, "I can pay the contract value." Owen looked at him. "It isn't your contract. I'm aware. Then stop buying your way into the conversation." Grant's expression cooled. "You're a contractor on estate property, and Mara is my customer." Mara set the dead cutting down. "Both of you, stop." They did, which almost made her angrier. Owen helped her move the ruined trays to the potting room. They counted losses before disposing of anything. 48 time cuttings, 17 geraniums, 12 tender salvia starts, and a flat of pelargonium seedlings. The hellebores, dormant and stubborn, showed no damage. When they finished, Owen wrote an estimated market value beside each line. The total was $940. It looked insultingly small. Mara signed the loss inventory and emailed it to Rachel. Grant asked for a copy. She gave him one without comment. By evening, the attorneys had agreed to 72 hours written notice before planned utility interruptions and immediate telephone notice of emergencies. Grant also agreed to reimburse the documented plant loss without requiring Mara to waive further claims. Rachel called that a useful concession. Mara called it $940. A separate electrical feed from the county line would cost between $7,000 and $10,000, depending on trenching and permits. The existing conduit could not simply be detached from the mansion because it crossed systems that had been altered more than once since the 1950s. Owen proposed a temporary dedicated sub-panel with a meter and isolation switch accessible from the service parcel. It would not create true independence, but it would prevent an electrician working uphill from casually shutting down the greenhouse. 2,800, he said. Mara looked at her notebook. 22, 26, 23, and I help trench. No. I know where the old irrigation line crosses. That is useful information, not a qualification. I spent 9 years inspecting county horticultural sites. I can dig a straight line. You're 68, the ground is frozen, and you walk stiffly before noon. Mara stared at him. Owen crossed out 2,600 and wrote 24. You do not help trench. You negotiate badly. I'm alive to enjoy it. They shook hands. The ruined order forced Mara to call 3 suppliers for replacement mother stock. 2 had nothing suitable until spring. The third offered trays at retail prices, high enough to erase any profit. She declined. Instead, she cut what remained of her winter time, mothers, more carefully, and accepted that Owen's order would be smaller and later. He reduced it to 36 pots and moved delivery back 2 weeks. The customer may buy elsewhere, he warned. I know, I'm still taking the hellebores. You haven't inspected them. I saw them. You saw dormant crowns. I know what healthy crowns look like. So do I. That's why you're getting 24, not 30. A week after the power loss, Helen Price came to the greenhouse with Rachel and a man carrying surveying equipment. Grant's attorney had requested confirmation that the location described in the will matched the physical parcel. The surveyor worked outside while Helen stood in the potting room, studying the brick beneath the table. This one, she asked. Mara indicated the loose paver. Helen crouched, declined Mara's offered hand, then accepted it when standing proved less graceful than crouching. I'm reconsidering Daniel's judgment, she said. Not testamentary judgment, storage judgment. You told him to use a cabinet. I told him to leave the original with me. He said Grant had started reorganizing papers in the mansion office, and he wanted the document somewhere Grant would never look. Mara looked at the paver. Did you write that down? I wrote that he elected to retain the original because he had a secure location unknown to the beneficiaries. I did not write that he concealed it beneath horticultural furniture. Would it matter? It explains why the original was not in my file. It may also allow opposing counsel to ask why Daniel distrusted his children. Rachel stood at the electrical diagram, comparing it with the survey attachment. Do you know why? Mara asked. Helen removed her glasses. He did not say he distrusted them generally. He said Grant had taken estate documents to make digital copies and returned some to different folders. Daniel wanted to control when the new will was disclosed. After his death. Yes. He left me to find it by accident. Helen considered that. He may have intended to tell you where it was. He may have believed the deed box was sufficiently obvious. Clients are capable of making excellent wills and terrible plans for storing them. Mara ran her glove along the potting table's edge. He could have told me. He could have told many people many things. Helen's tone was not unkind. It was the tone of someone who had spent a career watching silence become evidence. At the end of January, Mara sat for her deposition in Rachel's conference room. Grant's attorney, Thomas Vane, was a courteous man with silver-framed glasses and a habit of waiting 2 seconds after every answer. The pause made even simple truths feel unfinished. Grant and Lydia sat beside him. Grant had a legal pad. Lydia brought nothing. A court reporter administered the oath. Thomas began with Mara's marriage, employment history, finances, and role in Daniel's care. He asked who prepared meals, scheduled appointments, dispensed medication, opened mail, and paid household bills. I did, Mara answered again and again. Did Mr. Ellison depend on you to communicate with his physicians? Often. To manage his calendar? Yes. To determine whether he was well enough to receive visitors? I didn't determine it alone, but you sometimes told visitors not to come when he had infections or was exhausted. Did you ever tell Grant Ellison not to visit? Yes. Grant's pen stopped. On how many occasions? I don't remember. More than 5? Possibly. More than 10? Over 6 years? Possibly. Thomas waited 2 seconds. Did you keep a record? Not of every conversation, but you kept detailed medication records. Yes, records Mr. Ellison could not maintain himself. Toward the end, yes. When did he become unable? He could write. He couldn't reliably handle small pills or remember whether he had taken them. Was that before September 2023? Yes. Lydia shifted in her chair. Thomas moved to Daniel's cognitive condition. Had he ever mistaken the date? Yes. Failed to recognize someone? During illness. Once or twice. Accused Mara of moving objects he had misplaced. Frequently. Did he ever express paranoid beliefs? Mara looked at Rachel. You may answer if you understand, Rachel said. He sometimes thought people had taken things when he couldn't find them. Did he accuse Grant of taking papers? Yes. Grant looked up. Had Grant taken papers? He took files to scan them. Did Mr. Ellison know they had been returned? Some were returned to different places. That wasn't my question. No. Daniel didn't always believe everything had been returned. Thomas placed a hospital record on the table. 6 weeks after signing the purported will, Mr. Ellison was documented as disoriented to place. He had a urinary infection and a fever. Was he disoriented? Yes. Another 2-second pause. The questions turned to Helen. Mara had driven Daniel to her former office once and waited at a cafe. She believed the meeting concerned the greenhouse boundary. She had not scheduled it, attended it, or asked afterward what documents he signed. Why not? Thomas asked. Daniel said it was handled. You managed nearly every aspect of his life, but you did not ask what happened in a legal meeting concerning estate property? He was my husband, not my patient, every minute. No one moved. Thomas looked at his notes. Did you discuss the service parcel with him before September 2023? We discussed the well repairs and survey. Did you tell him you wanted the greenhouse? No. Did you tell him Grant and Lydia would force you out after his death? No. Did you believe they would? Mara looked across at them. I didn't let myself decide. Lydia's eyes lowered. Thomas asked about the day Mara found the will. Every step. The broken irrigation fitting, loose brick, box, photographs, telephone call, removal of the original. He displayed the pictures she had taken and enlarged the one showing the open box beneath the table. Why did you photograph it before calling anyone? Because Grant had changed the locks. Thomas paused. That action made you distrust him? It made me document things. When he finished, Grant and Lydia left first. Mara remained seated while the court reporter packed her equipment. Her shoulders felt as though she had spent 4 hours lifting trays. Rachel closed her file. You did well. I said Daniel was confused. You told the truth. They made care sound like custody. That was the purpose. Outside, Lydia waited alone beside Mara's station wagon. She held a photocopy of 1 page from the medication notebook. I didn't know he needed pills every 2 hours, she said. Not every day. He told me the pump handled most of it. The pump helped. Lydia folded the page once. Why didn't you tell us? Mara unlocked the car. I did. Lydia's face tightened. Not like this. No, Mara said. Never like this. Lydia held the folded page against her coat. You sent updates, she said. Blood pressure, medication changes, appointment dates. You never said you were doing all of it alone. I wasn't alone every hour. Grant hired the home care agency. For 8 hours a week. He said it was more. Then ask him why. Lydia looked toward the conference room windows. Grant and Thomas Vane were still inside somewhere, hidden behind reflective glass. I thought Dad didn't want us there, she said. Sometimes he didn't. That's a cruel thing to say. It was cruel when he said it, too. Mara opened the driver's door, but did not get in. Daniel had canceled visits when his speech was poor because he could not bear Grant finishing his sentences. He had refused Lydia's help bathing after one attempt ended with both of them embarrassed and furious. He wanted his children to remember the man who climbed ladders and drove too fast on back roads. Mara became the person allowed to see everything else, then resented for having seen it. "He loved you," Mara said. "He also hated being watched by you. That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No." Lydia unfolded the copied page. "At 10 in the morning on this date, he told me he was having a good week." Mara remembered the date. Daniel had fallen trying to reach the downstairs bathroom. He refused the emergency room, then spent an hour rehearsing his voice before calling Lydia. He wanted it to be true. So you let him lie. He was an adult. He was sick. Both things can be true. Lydia refolded the page along the same crease. "You always have an answer." "No, I have details. They're less satisfying." Mara got into the station wagon. Lydia stepped back but kept one hand on the open door. "Did he ever say he was angry with us?" "Yes." "About the greenhouse?" "Not specifically." "About what?" Mara thought of Daniel swearing after missed calls, then defending Grant's workload. She remembered him criticizing Lydia for visiting too briefly and asking Mara, 20 minutes after Lydia left, whether she had seemed tired. "You'll have to decide whether you want every answer he gave when he was frightened, medicated, or having a bad day," Mara said. "I don't think you do." Lydia released the door. "You decided for us before." "Sometimes," Mara said. "Yes." She drove away before either of them could make that admission cleaner than it was. The new sub-panel was installed 3 days later. Owen's electrician mounted it in the potting room beside the old panel, labeled each circuit, and fitted a meter Grant could read without entering Mara's space. The isolation switch made a solid mechanical clunk. Mara tested it twice. You understand it isn't a separate service," Owen said. "I understand. If the mansion loses power, you lose power. But the greenhouse can be isolated without shutting it off." "Yes, that is what I paid for." Owen handed her the invoice. "Try to remember that feeling." The frame repairs advanced 6 feet at a time. Dale removed corroded steel, Owen fitted new sections, and Mara cleaned salvageable glass at the potting sink. The work was slow because old greenhouses resisted straight lines. Every pane had settled into the frame around it, and replacing one changed the pressure on 3 others. By early February, the protected southern bay held steady above 40 degrees through the night. The surviving time mothers produced enough growth for a second round of cuttings. Mara placed 36 pots in neat rows and inserted labels bearing only the variety and date. She had not chosen a business name. Owen suggested Mara's Winter Garden. "It sounds like a cemetery," she said. "Ellison Glasshouse. It sounds like Grant owns it." "Briarwood Nursery. Lydia would sue me before breakfast." Owen leaned against the potting table. "What do you want customers to call it?" "A place that delivers what they ordered. That's hard to fit on a sign. No sign yet." He had placed a second small order for 18 propagated hellebores with a nursery near Poughkeepsie. Payment would be due on delivery. Mara accepted only after confirming she had 18 uniform divisions strong enough to pot on. Her projected income for the next 8 weeks now occupied one narrow column in her notebook. Expenses occupied 2 pages. Rachel's invoices arrived by email. Mara opened each one standing up. Discovery produced hundreds of messages between Grant, Lydia, and Daniel. Most were ordinary enough to hurt. Weather complaints, photographs of repairs, questions about holiday meals, links Grant sent without explanation. Daniel often replied with one word because typing had become difficult. 6 weeks after signing the 2023 will, Grant had emailed Daniel 3 roofing estimates and asked him to choose between slate repair and synthetic replacement. Daniel selected slate and explained why, in a dictated message Mara remembered helping him send. Grant replied, "I agree. You still understand this house better than any of us." Rachel showed Mara the exchange before Grant's deposition. "It doesn't prove capacity on the execution date," she said, "but it complicates his position that Daniel was incapable of understanding property decisions throughout that period." Grant sat across from Rachel in the same conference room where Mara had answered questions. Thomas Vane instructed him not to speculate. Lydia attended but chose a chair farther from her brother. Rachel began with the older will. Grant had received a copy from Daniel years earlier. He had kept it in a home safe and assumed it remained controlling. "Did you ask your father whether he had executed a later will?" Rachel asked. "No." "Why not?" "He disliked discussing death." "Did you discuss estate management with him?" "Yes." "Did you consider him capable of understanding the mansion's expenses in October 2023? "Some expenses." Rachel placed the roofing email before him. "You asked him to select a roof material for work estimated at $82,000. He had strong opinions about slate. Did you believe he understood the financial consequences? I believed he understood the historical consequences. Did you intend to disregard his selection if it was financially unreasonable?" Grant paused. "I wanted his view. You wrote that he understood the house better than any of you." That was encouragement. Mara saw Lydia look at him. Rachel continued. "When did you first form the opinion that your father lacked capacity to execute a will in September 2023, when I learned he had supposedly executed one in secret?" Thomas shifted. Grant realized what he had said. Rachel let the silence remain. Later she asked about the lock change, the boxes, and the demolition inquiry. Grant explained that his purpose was securing and evaluating the estate, not removing Mara or destroying her claimed property. "You booked an in-room before telling her," Rachel said. "As an option. Could Mrs. Ellison enter the mansion after you changed the locks?" "With permission." "Could she enter without permission the day before?" "She lived there." Grant's pen lay untouched beside him. During a break, Lydia followed Mara into the hall. "He truly thought he was helping with the inn," she said. "I know. That makes it worse to you. It makes it different." Lydia leaned against the wall. "The broker came yesterday. Mara had seen a white SUV near the mansion and a woman measuring the dining room windows. I thought you weren't listing yet. We need to understand the market. Responsibly." Lydia ignored that. "The broker says excluding the greenhouse parcel changes the kind of buyer we can attract. The lane is visible from the west rooms. Commercial traffic would be a problem. I don't expect commercial traffic. I'm planning wholesale orders and appointment pickup. She also says buyers won't like an unresolved utility easement. The will defines it. Defines isn't the same as resolves." Mara waited. Lydia rubbed the crease left by her watch band. There may be a way to avoid years of this. The offer arrived through the attorneys the next morning. Grant and Lydia would pay Mara $75,000 in exchange for withdrawing the 2023 will, relinquishing claims to the greenhouse parcel, leaving the cottage within 60 days, and signing a broad release. Her statutory rights as Daniel's spouse would be resolved separately under the older will, after valuation of the estate. Rachel read the terms aloud at the cottage table. "It's not nothing," she said. "No. It also isn't the value of what the later will gives you if upheld. What is that value? The land, structures, access, and well-need appraisal. The greenhouse's condition lowers value. The separate parcel increases it. I'm not going to invent a number." Mara looked through the window. Owen's truck was parked beside the greenhouse. A new steel base plate shone along the southern wall. $75,000 could pay rent for a while. It could replace her car and leave a cushion. It could also disappear into ordinary life without ever creating a home or income. "How much will it cost me to continue?" she asked. Rachel gave her a range that made $75,000 seem briefly larger. "If we lose, you still have whatever rights arise under the older will and New York law, less legal costs. You may also face claims concerning expenses, though I consider several of those weak." Mara rubbed one thumb over the cover of her notebook. Do I have to answer today? 1 week. Grant came down to the greenhouse that afternoon. He stopped outside the repaired bay, hands in his coat pockets. It's a fair offer, he said. We have attorneys. I'm not negotiating. You came down a hill in February to tell me a number is fair. He glanced at the rows of pots. You could buy a small place without taking on this ruin. Not nearby for $75,000. You'd have your spousal share too. After the estate is valued, fees are paid, and you finish objecting to anything you can object to. His mouth tightened. This isn't sustainable. What, you, alone, running a commercial greenhouse with no capital? Mara looked at his polished boots, already filmed with salt from the courtyard. Your father said it had to earn its keep. He wasn't realistic. Perhaps not. The agreement waited on Rachel's secure portal for 6 days. On the 7th, Mara drove 24 hellebores to Owen's nursery. He inspected every pot before accepting delivery. 2 were undersized. He rejected them. Mara replaced them with the 2 extras she had brought. Owen counted out the payment and handed her a receipt. It was not much money. It was the first money the greenhouse had earned. Back in the cottage, Mara placed the receipt beside the settlement offer. Then she opened the portal and selected Decline. The portal asked whether she was sure. Mara selected yes. A second box requested a reason. She typed, "The offer does not provide secure housing or replace the devised property." She deleted devised because it sounded like Rachel speaking through her fingers, then put it back because accuracy sometimes sounded unnatural. Grant called 40 minutes later. "I thought you wanted to avoid litigation. I want to avoid losing." "That isn't the same thing." "No. You could have made a counter-offer. You didn't offer enough to buy what you want. We offered enough for you to start over comfortably. For how long?" He was quiet. Mara sat at the cottage table with Owen's payment receipt in front of her. Through the window, the greenhouse shone against late-afternoon snow. The repaired lower frames were darker and straighter than the old steel, visible if a person knew where to look. Grant said, "You're risking everything for a building that has already consumed thousands of dollars. I'm risking legal fees for a home, land, water, and work. You have a pension. I also have years left if they go well. That isn't what I meant." "I know." His breath moved against the telephone. Dad did not understand what separating that parcel would do to Briarwood. He commissioned the description. He commissioned a survey for a well repair, and later attached the description to his will, with your attorney's help, his attorney. Grant ended the call without saying goodbye. The following morning, a broker's sign appeared near Briarwood's front drive. It did not say, "For sale." It said, "Private offering," as though the mansion were being invited to consider buyers rather than exposed to them. The greenhouse did not appear in the listing photographs. From the west terrace, the camera had been angled uphill to exclude the service lane. Lydia came down while Mara was potting thyme. "You saw the sign," she said. "It's difficult to miss. We're testing interest." Privately. Lydia looked at the rows of small pots. "Grant thinks you declined because your attorney advised you to. Rachel explained the risks." "That wasn't my question." "No, she didn't advise me to decline." "Why did you?" "I wrote a reason." "I read it." "Then why are you here?" Lydia took off her gloves 1 finger at a time. $75,000 isn't an insult. It's less than the land, and it requires me to leave the cottage. You'd receive more through the estate. Eventually. Maybe. You think we would cheat you. I think you changed the locks before asking what rights I had. Lydia laid her gloves on the potting table. You keep returning to that. I keep returning to the cottage because of it. The words hung between them. Lydia walked to the camellia and lifted one edge of its fleece cover. New buds had begun swelling along the older branches. "Will this bloom?" she asked. "If the temperature stays steady." "When?" "Late February or March." "My mother's did that?" "Every year. I don't remember seeing it. You weren't usually here in winter." Lydia replaced the fleece. "The broker thinks the mansion may take a year to sell," she said. "Longer with the parcel unresolved. That sounds expensive." "It is." Mara waited for the request hidden beneath the observation. Lydia did not make one. Instead, she picked up an empty pot and inspected the drainage holes. "What are these for?" "Time cuttings. The ones that froze. The replacements." "You started again. What else would I do?" Lydia set the pot down. "I don't know." Neither did Mara, some mornings. She simply began before doubt finished dressing. The time delivery produced 33 acceptable plants. Owen rejected 3 for weak roots and accepted the shortfall without adjusting the original wholesale price downward. "You ordered 36, Mara said. "I received 33. You paid for 36. I'll credit the difference against your next glass invoice. That's unnecessarily complicated. It preserves my reputation for being difficult." He sold the plants within 9 days. The Poughkeepsie nursery collected its 18 hellebores and asked whether Mara could supply 40 more the following winter. She wrote the request in her notebook without treating it as income. A future order was not money, and a compliment was not an order. The greenhouse continued charging for every small success. A circulation fan failed. 2 salvage panes cracked during installation. The used heating unit passed pressure testing, but required a new control board, adding $600. Mara approved it after removing $600 from the spring repair column. By the time the probate hearing began in Poughkeepsie, dirty snow had retreated into parking lot corners. Mara wore her charcoal coat into the courthouse and folded her green scarf over her arm. The hearing room was smaller than she expected. No carved walls, no dramatic railing, only blonde wood, fluorescent lighting, and a clock that ticked loudly whenever the attorneys stopped speaking. Helen sat beside Rachel with Daniel's original will in a protective sleeve. Grant and Lydia sat across the aisle. Grant wore the same dark suit he had worn to the funeral. Lydia's navy jacket had a loose thread at one cuff that she kept rubbing between her fingers. Helen testified first. Rachel led her through Daniel's initial contact, the existing will, the survey, the property description, and their private meetings. Helen identified her file copy, notes, correspondence, and the original Mara had delivered. "Did Daniel Ellison tell you why he wished to execute a new will?" Rachel asked. "Yes. He believed his prior will failed to provide his wife with secure housing and an asset capable of supporting productive use. Did he intend to remove his children as beneficiaries? No. He was explicit that the mansion and primary estate should pass to Grant and Lydia Ellison. Did he understand that dividing the greenhouse parcel could affect the mansion? Yes. We discussed access, utilities, marketability, and maintenance responsibilities. Thomas Vane rose for cross-examination. "Ms. Price, you are retired?" "Yes." "You closed your practice less than a year after this document was allegedly executed?" "It was executed." "And yes, your office no longer exists. The physical office does not. My records do. You did not retain the original will." "Mr. Ellison chose to keep it." "Against your advice?" "Yes." "And he concealed it beneath a brick floor. I learned its location after his death. Did that strike you as rational behavior?" Helen tilted her head. "I have represented clients who stored wills in freezers, flour tins, piano benches, and one boot. Rationality in document storage is not a requirement for testamentary capacity." A brief sound moved through the room before the judge looked up. Thomas displayed Helen's memorandum, stating Daniel wanted a location unknown to the beneficiaries. Did Mr. Ellison express suspicion of his children? He expressed concern that Grant had reorganized documents in the mansion office and might encounter the will before Daniel wished to disclose it. "Did you investigate whether those suspicions resulted from cognitive decline?" I asked Daniel what had happened. He described Grant removing files for scanning and returning them in a different order. Records produced in this case confirm Grant scanned estate files during that period. Grant stared at the table. Thomas changed direction. "Mrs. Ellison drove Daniel to your office. She drove him to the building on the first occasion. He came upstairs alone. On the execution date, my office arranged transportation at his request. Why? He did not want to involve his wife or allow her to know what he was doing. That is another way to phrase the same fact. Ruth Calder testified by video from Albany. The connection froze twice, once with her mouth open and once while Thomas was objecting, which Mara privately considered better timing. Ruth remembered Daniel moving slowly and asking for a firmer pen. She watched him sign without assistance. Before witnessing, she asked whether the document was his will and whether he wanted her to act as a witness. He answered yes to both. Did he appear ill? Thomas asked. He had Parkinson's disease. That wasn't my question. He appeared physically impaired. He did not appear confused. Samuel Ortiz testified in person. He had known Helen professionally but had never met Daniel before that day. Helen brought Daniel into his office before signing and asked Samuel to speak with him. "What did you discuss?" Rachel asked. "The Yankees, property taxes, and why old greenhouses are more expensive than boats." Mara lowered her eyes. "Did Mr. Ellison describe the document?" "He said his children were getting the house and his wife was getting the working part. What did you understand that to mean?" "The greenhouse and cottage. He said she had kept them alive and would know what to do with them." Thomas asked whether Samuel had any expertise assessing cognitive capacity. "No." "Then your opinion is based on a brief conversation." "My observation is based on a brief conversation. I'm not offering a diagnosis." The medical records took most of the afternoon. Daniel's neurologist documented slowed speech, motor decline, and mild attention problems. Notes near the execution date described him as alert, oriented, and able to participate in treatment decisions. The later hospital record documented temporary confusion during infection. Neither side received the clean version of Daniel it wanted. When Grant testified, Rachel returned to the roofing emails. Grant explained that historical judgment was not the same as financial capacity. Rachel asked why he had allowed Daniel to approve an $82,000 slate repair if he believed him unable to understand financial consequences. "I didn't believe that then," Grant said. "When did you begin believing it? After reviewing the full course of his decline? After learning of the later will?" "Yes, but not because of it." Rachel let the answer stand. Lydia testified that Daniel often spoke of preserving Briarwood intact. She described telephone calls in which he forgot previous conversations and a visit when he accused Grant of moving papers already returned. Thomas asked whether Daniel's condition affected his consistency. Yes. Did it affect his judgment? Sometimes. On cross-examination, Rachel handed Lydia the deposition transcript. "Did you tell Mara that Daniel was clear most days?" Lydia looked toward Mara before answering. "Yes. Was that true?" "Yes." "Did you believe he understood you during your telephone call on the evening of September 14th, 2023? "I don't remember that specific call." Rachel showed her a message she sent Grant afterward. "Dad sounded strong tonight. He knew exactly which photograph I meant." Lydia read it. "I believed he was clear during that call. That was 2 days before the will was signed?" "Yes." Mara's testimony came last. She described finding the deed box, photographing it, calling Helen, and removing the original for safekeeping. Thomas asked why Daniel would hide a will benefiting Mara in the exact place she worked. "I can't tell you why Daniel did something he never told me he did." "Yet you found it." "Yes. Conveniently." "No," Mara said. "Nothing about that week was convenient." Thomas walked her again through Daniel's dependents. Meals, medication, bathing, transportation, bills. Each answer seemed to build the same invisible wall. "Would Mr. Ellison have been able to remain at Briarwood without you?" he asked. "Not safely. So he understood that his continued residence depended on your goodwill." Mara looked at the judge, then at Grant and Lydia. "He understood that his continued residence depended on my work." The distinction entered the quiet room and stayed there. At the end of the second day, the judge took the matter under advisement. She requested briefs on the property description and utility provisions and gave the attorneys 3 weeks. Outside the courthouse, everyone paused beneath a sky the color of old glass. Grant walked toward the parking lot without speaking. Lydia remained on the steps. "What happens now?" she asked. "We wait," Mara said. Lydia rubbed the loose thread at her cuff. "You were right about one thing." Mara waited. "I didn't want every answer." Then Lydia followed her brother, leaving Mara alone with Daniel's careful words still being carried, page by page, into the judge's chambers. Waiting turned every ordinary task into a place for worry to sit. It sat beside Mara while she mixed potting medium, followed her down the central aisle, and leaned over her shoulder whenever an email arrived. Rachel warned that silence from the court meant only that the judge was working. Helen said judges were under no obligation to match horticultural expectations. "What does that mean?" Mara asked. "Well, you keep digging up the seed to see whether it germinated. I have never done that. Then apply your restraint elsewhere." The 3 weeks granted for briefs became 4 after Thomas Vane requested time to respond to the surveyor's report. The report confirmed that the 2.4-acre parcel could be located from the description attached to the will. The service lane lay entirely within the described access strip. The well stood 21 feet inside the parcel boundary. The electrical feed crossed from the mansion parcel, exactly as the utility provision anticipated. Grant's attorney argued that the breadth of the utility language showed Daniel could not have understood the burden imposed on Briarwood. Rachel answered that Helen's notes recorded a specific discussion of those burdens. Mara read both briefs and wished she had not. Legal writing made every human intention sound as if it had been assembled with brackets. The old camellia bloomed first. One cold morning, Mara pulled back the fleece and found a deep, pink flower open near the center of the plant. Its petals had browned slightly at one edge, but the rest held. She took a photograph and nearly sent it to Lydia. Instead, she put the phone away and opened the vents for 20 minutes to lower the humidity. Lydia appeared that afternoon. "The broker wants the cottage included in the next appraisal visit," she said. "The cottage isn't part of the mansion parcel under the later will. I know. They want to understand the effect of excluding it. They can view it from the lane. They asked to see inside." "No." Lydia's mouth tightened. "You don't have an order yet. I have temporary exclusive use under the agreement your attorney signed. I didn't come to fight about it. You came to ask a stranger into the room where I sleep. When you say it that way, it is that way." Lydia looked past Mara and saw the camellia. The open flower seemed too bright for the old greenhouse, a pink flame among gray steel and winter leaves. "It bloomed," she said. "One did." Lydia walked closer but stopped before touching it. "Was that the color?" "It has always been that color. I mean, when my mother had it. Plants don't usually change color to accommodate grief." Lydia looked sideways at her. "You could occasionally let a sentence be nice. I could." "Will there be more? Flowers?" "Yes. Probably 12 or 15 if the buds hold." Lydia took out her phone, then paused. "May I?" Mara nodded. Lydia photographed the flower from 3 angles. None included Mara. "I'd like one," she said. "You can't cut a flower from a camellia and make another camellia. I know that." "You drowned a fern." "I was 9. Mara lifted a branch and examined the new growth. "I can take cuttings after flowering. They root slowly." "How slowly?" "Long enough to improve your character." Lydia gave her the first unguarded smile Mara had seen since Daniel's death. "Fine," she said. "Put me on the list." The judge's decision arrived the next morning while Mara was washing used pots. Her phone rang on the shelf above the sink. Rachel's name appeared. Mara dried one hand on her trousers and answered with the other still wet. "The 2023 will has been admitted to probate," Rachel said. Water continued running into the basin. Mara reached across and shut it off. "Admitted," she repeated. The judge found the will duly executed. She found Daniel possessed testamentary capacity at the time of signing and that the evidence did not establish undue influence. Mara sat on the nearest overturned bucket. Rachel continued, reading from the decision. Helen's execution records and the testimony of both witnesses supported proper signing. Daniel accurately understood the nature of his property, the people who would ordinarily receive it, and the effect of the distribution. His physical dependence on Mara and episodes of confusion during illness did not establish incapacity on the execution date. The judge addressed Mara's caregiving directly. It placed her in a position of trust and created circumstances requiring careful scrutiny. But Daniel met with Helen privately, arranged transportation without Mara, gave rational instructions consistent across multiple meetings, and preserved substantial gifts to Grant and Lydia. The property description was also upheld, Rachel said. Helen can proceed as executor once the decree and letters issue. Can they appeal? They can. We'll discuss deadlines. Thomas indicated they would review the decision. Mara looked around the potting room. The loose paver remained slightly uneven beneath the table. The amber work lamp stood in its usual place. On the shelves, the surviving time cuttings had begun branching. Nothing in the room appeared to understand that it had changed owners in the eyes of the law. "Are you there?" Rachel asked. "Yes." "You won." Mara looked through the glass at Briarwood uphill. The will won. That distinction may matter emotionally. Today, it costs the same. Rachel explained that the ruling did not end administration. The deed transferring the parcel had to be prepared and recorded. Utility responsibilities required documentation. Property insurance, taxes, and operating costs would become Mara's alone. The estate still had expenses and distributions to settle. Mara listened carefully. When the call ended, she turned the water back on and finished washing the pot in her hand. Owen arrived 20 minutes later, carrying the used heater's new control board. "You look strange," he said. The will was upheld. He set the box on the table. "All of it?" "The greenhouse parcel, cottage, well lane, and utility rights. Grant and Lydia keep the mansion." Owen nodded once. "Good. That's all?" "I brought a speech, but it was priced separately." Mara laughed, then covered her mouth with the back of her wet hand. The laugh bent into something else before she could stop it. Owen looked away and began opening the control board box. He gave her the privacy of remaining in the room without watching. "I thought I would feel different," she said. "You've owned it for 20 seconds. Legally, not yet. Then save the feeling until the deed records." She stood and pressed both palms against the edge of the potting table. "What if I can't make it work?" Owen examined the new board. "That question was valid yesterday, too. I could have blamed them yesterday. You would have found it unsatisfying." He handed her the installation instructions. "Read those while I turn off the heater circuit." Grant came down before noon. He entered without knocking, then seemed to remember the ruling and stepped back outside the potting room doorway. "May I come in?" Mara looked at the threshold. Yes. He removed his gloves. His face revealed nothing until he saw Owen working at the heater. "Thomas received the decision," he said. "So did Rachel. We haven't decided whether to appeal." "All right. You don't seem concerned." "I am concerned. You could still negotiate." The judge upheld the will. Judges are reversed. Sometimes. Grant looked toward Owen. "Can we speak privately?" Owen gathered his tools. "I need to test the thermostat from the South Bay," he said, loudly. When he was gone, Grant took a folded sheet from his coat. It was not another settlement offer. It was a preliminary appraisal showing the mansion's value with and without uncontested control of the service parcel. Mara did not take it. "The difference is substantial," he said. "So is the mansion's value. That isn't the point. It is if you're asking me to surrender land so you can increase what you receive. You're reducing this to money. You brought an appraisal." Grant placed it on the potting table. "Dad wanted Briarwood protected. Then why are you selling it?" His face changed. "Because neither Lydia nor I can maintain it indefinitely." "Neither can I." The greenhouse isn't Briarwood. It was when you thought you owned it. He put both hands on the table. Do you enjoy this? No. You always wanted him to admit the house was a burden. I wanted him to stop pretending I could carry it forever. Grant looked toward the mansion through the glass. When he first got sick, I asked him to move closer to me, he said. He refused. I know. I offered to arrange full-time care. You sent him 3 brochures. I was trying. Yes. Grant turned back sharply as though agreement accused him more efficiently than blame. I had a job, a life. I couldn't move here. I know. And you could. I was already here. That made you the good one. No. It made me the available one. For a moment, neither spoke. Grant's hands loosened on the table. Do you know what he said when I asked how you were managing? He asked. He said you like to be busy. Mara closed her eyes briefly. Daniel had said the same thing to doctors, neighbors, anyone who praised her endurance. Mara likes to be busy. As if labor were a small appetite of hers, he graciously permitted. He said that to me, too, she said. Grant looked surprised. Mara opened her eyes. Your father loved me. He also found useful explanations for what I gave him. Grant folded the appraisal again. We probably won't appeal, he said. Thomas says the factual findings would be difficult to overturn. Lydia agrees. She doesn't want another hearing. And you? I don't want to spend the estate fighting over a greenhouse. The words were meant to reduce it. They reduced him instead. Grant reached the doorway, then stopped. I'll have your remaining boxes delivered. I can collect them. They'll be delivered. Ask first. He nodded once. May I have them delivered? Yes. That afternoon, Helen called to complain about being officially appointed executor. Daniel has succeeded in interrupting my retirement, she said. The decree should issue shortly. I'll have the deed drafted, the easements reviewed, and separate utility accounting established. Thank you. Thank Daniel. Then blame him. Both are appropriate. What do you need from me? Insurance quotes, a mailing address for tax notices, funds for expenses attributable to your parcel after transfer. You are inheriting responsibility, not a postcard. I know. You also need a name for the property. Owen said the same. Then I withdraw the suggestion. Grant and Lydia did not appeal. When the deadline passed, Rachel sent Mara a message containing only final, the deed recorded in early March. Helen brought a certified copy to the cottage, along with a folder of utility documents and a bill from the estate for Mara's prorated fuel use. I see death hasn't softened you, Mara said. Death generally produces paperwork, not discounts. Helen placed the folder on the kitchen table. Mara signed acknowledgments, wrote a check, and received the keys controlling the service gate. Cottage, well enclosure, potting room, and greenhouse. Grant's temporary codes were removed. The mansion's security system no longer governed the lane. After Helen left, Mara walked to the gate. She opened it, closed it, and opened it again. No alarm sounded. No permission expired at 8. No one watched from the mansion. Mara stood in her own narrow lane with the keys cold in her hand. Then she went back to work. Work acquired its own calendar. The heater installation divided March into before and after. Before, Mara checked the temperature every hour and slept with her phone against her palm. After, she checked every 2 hours and slept with it on the bedside table. Owen refused to call that progress. The used unit heated only the southern bays, exactly as planned. Thermal curtains separated warm space from cold. On clear afternoons, the winter sun did most of the work. At night, the new controls maintained temperature without the coughing restarts of the old boiler. The first fuel bill was still higher than Mara wanted. She sat at the potting table with the bill, her notebook, and a calculator. The nursery income had covered electricity and part of the repair payment. Her pension covered the cottage and personal expenses. Savings covered everything that did not fit politely into either category. Insurance required a handrail at the cottage steps and replacement of 2 loose greenhouse door panels. The county required confirmation that retail visits would remain limited and parking would not spill onto the public road. Mara kept wholesale as the center of the plan. She registered the business as Briar Lane Nursery after rejecting 11 other names. Owen disliked it because it was sensible. "No mystery," he said. "I sell plants, no poetry. I send invoices. No reference to rebirth, resilience, or glass." That was deliberate. He printed her first order forms with Briar Lane Nursery across the top in plain green letters. Mara paid him for the printing. He complained that friendship had been reduced to bookkeeping. "You charged me $4 for a weatherproof connector," she said. "It was an excellent connector." April softened the ground. Water returned to the dormant beds, and the greenhouse smelled less of cold brick than living soil. Mara propagated hellebores, hardy geraniums, thyme, rosemary, and several cold-tolerant perennials suited to local gardens. She discarded varieties requiring more heat than their sale price justified. When she caught herself keeping something merely because Daniel had liked it, she moved it to a single private bench. One bench could hold memory without making it the business plan. The first large soil delivery came on a wet Thursday. Mara tried to move the bags from the lane herself because she disliked paying a handling fee for 30 yards of distance. On the fourth bag, a sharp pain crossed her lower back. She stopped before it became an injury which felt less like wisdom than defeat. Owen arrived with Dale and found her standing beside the pallet with both hands on her hips. "How many?" he asked. 3.5. "You moved half a bag?" "I reconsidered during the fourth." "Good. Growth. I hate you. That'll keep you warm." They moved the remaining bags with a cart. Owen added the delivery labor to her next invoice despite her objection. "You are budgeting for a 68-year-old human," he said, "not an imaginary employee with your knowledge and a forklift for a spine." The next soil order included placement inside the greenhouse. Mara's first repeat customer was the Poughkeepsie Nursery. Its buyer ordered 60 hellebore divisions for the following season, 24 hardy geraniums, and a trial of winter savory. Owen placed another order for culinary starts. A garden designer from Red Hook requested small quantities of shade perennials for 2 properties. None of the orders was large enough to transform Mara's finances. Together, they gave her a production schedule. The planting ledgers from the deed box became useful in ways Daniel had not predicted. Years of bloom dates and temperature notes helped Mara choose mother plants that performed reliably in the old structure. She transferred the information to new records and kept Daniel's ledgers wrapped in archival paper on a potting room shelf. She did not put them back under the floor. Helen completed the final estate work in May. She arrived at the cottage with a closing statement, 2 tomato seedlings, and an expression of hostility toward both. "These are allegedly Brandywine," she said. "They have been trying to die since February." Mara examined them. "They're stretched, overwatered, underfed, and planted too deep. I followed the directions." "Which directions?" "A website. That narrows it down." Helen set the estate folder on the table. Grant and Lydia had received their distributions and title documentation for the mansion. Utility metering was complete. Mara's parcel expenses had been separated. Nothing remained under Helen's administration except final tax filings. "You are now free to communicate with one another without billing an attorney for the privilege," Helen said. "I'm not sure anyone wants that. An underappreciated benefit of legal closure." Mara repotted the tomatoes. Helen watched as if witnessing minor surgery. "Will they live?" "One may." "Which? I don't make guarantees before the roots recover." Helen left both plants and returned 2 weeks later for the survivor. By then, the old camellia had finished flowering. Mara took 6 cuttings, including one for Lydia. Camellias rooted slowly and resentfully. She told Lydia not to expect anything for months. Lydia began asking about them once a week, not calling, texting. "Any roots?" "No." "Still no?" "They do not respond to pressure." "Are you talking about the camellias or us?" Mara stared at that message for a long time before replying. "Yes." In June, the private offering sign at the mansion was replaced by a discreet real estate placard bearing the broker's name. Cars began coming up the main drive. Prospective buyers stood on the west terrace and looked downhill toward the greenhouse. Mara planted a low hedge along the edge of her lane, far enough inside her boundary to leave access clear. The shrubs were small and looked ridiculous. In 5 years, they would provide separation. Planning for 5 years felt more daring than discovering the will. Lydia visited one morning while Mara was labeling geraniums. Someone asked whether the greenhouse could be converted into an event space. She said, "No. I told them it wasn't included." "Good. They asked whether you might sell." "No. I told them that too." Mara pushed a label into the next pot. "Thank you." Lydia rested her forearms on the potting table. "Grant says I shouldn't answer for you. Grant dislikes unauthorized answers. He thinks everything requires authority. He comes by it honestly." Lydia looked toward the mansion. "We had an offer." Mara waited. "It was lower than we expected. That usually describes offers. They want a fast closing. Do you?" "I thought I did." The answer sat between them. Mara did not offer advice. Lydia had spent months resenting decisions made without her, while asking other people to tell her what to do. "Your cutting has callus," Mara said. "Is that good? It is not a root, but it might become one." "Yes." Lydia smiled without turning around. "You enjoy making me wait. The plant enjoys it more." The mansion offer collapsed over financing. A second buyer objected to the cost of the roof and the lack of control over the service parcel. Grant blamed the market. Lydia blamed the broker. The formal gardens grew untidy. Mara could see the change from below. Boxwood edges blurred. Weeds appeared between terrace stones. The rose beds needed pruning, and the gravel paths had washed thin after spring rain. For 18 years, Mara had performed those tasks herself or hired help from the household budget. Once the parcel separated, she stopped at the boundary. Grant came to the greenhouse in July carrying photographs. "The grounds contractor quit," he said. Mara continued watering a tray. "Why?" "He took another account." "Why did he take another account?" "He said the work exceeded the scope we agreed." Mara turned off the hose. "Did it?" Grant placed the photographs on the table. The west border had bindweed climbing through the roses. "The broker says the gardens need to be restored before the next showing. Restored is a large word. We need them presentable. Then hire someone." "We did. You hired someone to mow lawns and trim hedges. That isn't the same as managing old borders." Grant rubbed his forehead. "You know the gardens." "Yes, so I'm asking whether you can help." Mara looked at the photographs again. She knew every weak point. The west border needed 2 people for at least 3 days. The roses required selective pruning, not the severe haircut most crews would give them. The terrace containers were empty. "When is the showing?" 2 weeks. I'll inspect and send an estimate." Grant stared at her. "An estimate? For labor, materials, 2 temporary workers, and disposal. I assumed you might want to keep the gardens from being damaged. They are your gardens. They were Dad's. They were work." His face hardened. "You're going to charge us to maintain your husband's home. Your home. You lived there and maintained it without wages. That was part of your life with Dad. Yes, it was still work." Grant gathered the photographs too quickly, bending one corner. "Forget it." "All right." He reached the doorway. "You asked me to help," Mara said. "I told you what help costs. That isn't punishment. It feels cold." Mara folded the hose onto its hook. Care often looks warm to the person receiving it. Grant left without answering. Lydia called that evening. "What did you say to him?" "The truth with an estimate attached. He says you want to bill us for Daniel. I want to bill you for pruning." Lydia sighed. "Can you inspect tomorrow?" "Yes. Send the estimate to both of us." Mara walked the mansion gardens at 7 the next morning while Grant remained inside. Lydia followed with a notebook. The neglect was real but not catastrophic. 3 days of skilled work would restore the borders. The roses could be saved. The gravel required additional stone, not wishful raking. Mara wrote a detailed scope and priced it fairly. She included her own time at the same hourly rate she had paid experienced horticultural workers years earlier. She added 2 adult seasonal workers recommended by Owen and a separate line for materials. Grant objected to her management fee. Lydia approved it. They argued by email for a day, then both signed. Mara required half in advance. The work began Monday. She directed the 2 workers, handled the roses herself, and stopped lifting when her back warned her. Lydia brought coffee down from the mansion. Grant stayed away until the 3rd afternoon when the west border had emerged from beneath the bindweed. He stood on the terrace looking at it. Mara climbed the steps with her invoice folder. "The work will be finished tomorrow," she said. "The containers still need planting if you want them done." "How much?" She handed him the additional estimate. Grant read it. Then he signed without argument. At the bottom of the hill, Owen's truck turned into Briar Lane Nursery, carrying the first load of glass for the next repair phase. Mara watched it pass through her gate, then looked back at Grant. Neither of them said thank you. This time, neither of them needed to. The new glass covered only the southern wall and 2 roof sections. Mara left the north bays untouched, except for replacing panes that posed a safety risk. Their steel bases still needed work, and the old heating pipes would remain empty. She could not afford to restore the entire greenhouse, and she no longer confused finishing everything with succeeding. Owen's crew completed the repaired section in August. The last pane settled into its gasket with a rubber-edged thump. Dale climbed down from the scaffold. Owen sprayed the new seals with water and inspected the interior for leaks. "One at the lower corner," Mara said. Owen looked. A thin line of water ran beneath the new pane. "You could let me find something occasionally. You charge by the hour." He reseated the gasket. Mara paid the final installment with money from plant sales, the mansion garden contract, and savings. The balance in her account was lower than it had been when Daniel died. In exchange, the greenhouse no longer shed glass during wind, the protected bays held heat, and the rust had stopped advancing through the structure she needed most. That was not profit. It was capacity. Profit came in smaller envelopes. Briar Lane Nurseries supplied 6 wholesale customers by the end of summer. 2 ordered regularly. 4 ordered when Mara had something they could not propagate economically themselves. She learned which buyers paid in 14 days and which treated 30-day invoices as a philosophical suggestion. She stopped accepting orders below a minimum that justified packing and delivery. She charged for special labels. When a garden designer changed an order after Mara had potted 70 plants, Mara billed a restocking fee and lost the customer. Owen approved. "I don't enjoy losing customers," she said. "You enjoy keeping money. I'm becoming shallow. It's lovely to see." Her back restricted how much she could produce alone. Rather than pretend otherwise, Mara hired an experienced member of the County Horticultural Society for 2 mornings a week during the busiest months. Ruthie Cole was 61, recently retired from a medical laboratory, and believed every work surface could be improved by labeling it. Within 3 days, she had labeled shelves Mara had used by instinct for years. "You put dormant stock on dormant stock," Mara said, "so other people know. There are no other people. I'm other people." Mara kept the label. Ruthie's wages narrowed the margins on several orders, but production became more reliable. Mara's shoulders hurt less. She stopped dropping asleep over dinner. The Horticultural Society asked whether it could hold a propagation workshop in the greenhouse. Mara agreed to 1 adult session with 12 participants, no open public hours, and a fee that covered heat, materials, and her time. The workshop filled in 2 days. On the morning it took place, Mara stood beside the potting table demonstrating how to take heel cuttings from woody herbs. A retired teacher asked too many questions. A restaurant owner took notes on his sleeve. Two master gardeners disagreed politely about rooting hormones until Ruthie placed separate trays in front of them and told them to produce evidence. Owen arrived late, drank the coffee, and contributed nothing. "I contributed customers," he said. "You contributed an empty pastry box. Community takes many forms." After everyone left, used cups crowded the sink, and soil covered the brick floor. Mara should have been tired. She was. But the tiredness belonged to work with a beginning, an invoice, and an ending. No one had assumed she would provide it because she was nearby and female and loved the person asking. She swept the floor while Ruthie counted leftover pots. At the mansion, the boarders remained presentable through the final summer showings. Grant paid Mara's invoices within 10 days. He challenged one charge for disposal, then paid it after Mara sent him the receipt. The siblings accepted an offer in September from two adults moving north from Manhattan. The buyers wanted the mansion and formal grounds, not the greenhouse. Their attorney reviewed the recorded access and utility rights. A separate hedge and the existing stone wall satisfied their concerns about the service lane. The price was lower than Grant and Lydia had imagined at the funeral, and higher than either could have obtained, while the parcel remained disputed. The sale would still leave them both with substantial inheritances. Lydia brought the news to the potting room. "They want to close in November," she said. "That's fast. They have no house to sell. Convenient." Lydia gave her a look. "You've been spending time with Helen. Helen's tomatoes lived. One lived. That was the agreement." Lydia walked to the propagation shelf. Her camellia cutting had finally produced roots and 2 new leaves. Mara had potted it separately, but had not labeled it with Lydia's name. "Is that mine?" "If you continue not touching it." "I haven't touched it in months." "You've developed discipline." Lydia studied the small plant. "What do I do with it when I take it?" "Keep it in bright indirect light. Cool, not freezing. Don't overwater. Don't put it next to a radiator. I live in an apartment." Camellias don't object to apartments. They object to apartments managed by anxious people. Lydia smiled, then became serious. "The buyers asked whether you would continue managing the gardens." "I won't." "Why?" "Because I have spring orders and one functioning back. They'll pay. So will my customers." Lydia looked toward the mansion. "I thought you'd want to stay connected." "I am connected. I can see it from almost every pane." "That isn't what I meant." Mara adjusted the cutting stake. "No," she said, "it isn't." She gave the buyers the names of 2 qualified horticultural contractors. One was the man Grant had originally hired for lawn care, who accepted the expanded work after receiving an expanded contract. In October, Grant asked Mara to walk through the mansion before the contents were divided or sent to auction. She entered through the front door for the first time since the locks had changed. The hall looked larger without boxes. Small paper tags marked furniture and art, but this inventory was being conducted by professionals rather than grieving relatives with colored stickers. Grant met her near the staircase. "Lydia wants the silver," he said. "The will gives it to her." "I know." He wore Daniel's watch. The leather strap was newer than Mara remembered. "I thought you might want something from the kitchen," he continued. "Or the bedroom. I took my things." "There may be things we missed." They moved from room to room. Mara identified a set of copper pans she had purchased before marrying Daniel. Grant added them to her list without argument. A framed botanical print in the upstairs hall had been a gift from her former county co-workers. Daniel's heavy wool blanket belonged to Mara, though Lydia had assumed it was family property because she remembered it from visits. The bedroom had been stripped of medical traces. Daniel's clothes hung in garment bags. His shoes were gone. Mara stood near the empty section of closet where her clothes had once been. "I should not have changed the locks," Grant said. She turned. He looked toward the windows rather than at her. "My attorney said the estate needed securing. I heard what I wanted to hear." "You changed them before speaking to an attorney." Grant's face tightened. "I had scheduled it before speaking to him. Then don't put it on the attorney. No." The word cost him. He touched the watch at his wrist. I thought if Lydia and I took control quickly, there would be less confusion. Dad left bills everywhere. You were exhausted. The house needed decisions. So you made me one of the things to manage." "Yes." Mara waited for more. Grant seemed to expect forgiveness to appear in the silence if he remained still long enough. It did not. "You paid for an inn," she said. "I thought that made it less cruel. It made it organized." He nodded. From downstairs came the sound of Lydia speaking to the appraiser. The house carried her voice through rooms she was preparing to leave. "I'm sorry," Grant said. Mara looked at Daniel's side of the closet. "I believe you." Grant finally met her eyes. "Is that enough?" "No." He took that without defending himself. They finished the walkthrough. Mara claimed the botanical print, the pans, the wool blanket, and a dented metal watering can from the mudroom that Daniel had repaired twice and should have discarded both times. She left the rest. On closing day, a moving truck blocked the main drive. Mara continued working downhill. Lydia carried the camellia cutting to her car herself. Mara wrapped the pot in paper and provided written instructions. "I know not to overwater it," Lydia said. "The instructions also explain fertilizer. I can read. You photographed a federal reproduction for a property inventory." Lydia tucked the paper into her purse. "I'm going to put it near my east window, 2 feet back, 1 foot, then watch the leaves." Lydia opened the car door but did not put the plant inside. Grant says he apologized. He did. "Did you?" "For what?" Lydia gave her a tired look. "He didn't tell me what you said. I said I believed him. That sounds like you." "What did he want me to say?" "That it was all right." "It wasn't." "No." Lydia looked at the small camellia between her hands. "I'm sorry too," she said, not in a general, graceful way. "I'm sorry I packed your clothes before asking when you wanted to leave. I'm sorry I labeled your things as if you were already gone." Mara felt the words arrive in places she had kept too busy to examine. "You wrapped my gardening gloves in tissue paper. I didn't know what else to do with them. They had soil on them. It got on the tissue." Despite herself, Mara laughed. Lydia laughed too, then pressed her lips together. "I don't know what we are now," she said. "We don't need to decide in the driveway. Service lane. My service lane. There she is." Lydia placed the camellia carefully on the passenger side floor. They did not embrace. When Lydia left, she drove slowly over the uneven section near the gate without needing Mara to warn her. Grant departed an hour later. He stopped beside the greenhouse and handed Mara a sealed envelope containing final payment for the garden work. "You could have mailed it," she said. "I wanted a receipt." "Of course you did." She signed one on the hood of his car. Grant put it in his wallet. "The buyers asked whether you would object to them repairing the stone wall," he said. "If they stay on their side and use lime mortar, appropriate to the old stone." "No." "I told them to contact you directly." "Good." He glanced through the glass at the rows of plants. "It looks different." "It is different. Dad would have liked it." Mara slipped the envelope into her coat pocket. He would have complained about the plastic pots. Grant smiled faintly. He hated plastic pots. He bought hundreds. He liked complaining more. That too was true. Grant got into his car. Before closing the door, he looked uphill at the mansion, then downhill at Mara. "We both got what he left us," he said. "Yes." It was not the same as getting what any of them thought they were owed. The new owners moved into Briarwood before the first hard freeze. Their lights appeared in different rooms. They used the front drive and left Mara's lane alone. A month later, their contractor repaired the stone wall correctly. By December, Briar Lane Nursery had advance orders sufficient to cover projected greenhouse heat, insurance, property taxes, Ruthie's spring hours, and the next modest frame repair. Mara's pension still covered her living costs. Her savings were not restored, and the greenhouse did not provide a fortune. It provided work that could continue without consuming everything else. She closed the year's accounts twice because the first result seemed too encouraging. Owen checked them and found a formula error that made the result less encouraging. "I knew I kept you around for something," Mara said. Humility. Glass. Also glass. The following January brought another ice storm. By late afternoon, the sky had cleared. Frost edged the greenhouse panes, patchy snow covered the service parcel, and Briarwood stood uphill in clean winter light. The southern bays held rows of hellebores, culinary starts, and hardy perennial stock. The north bays remained dormant behind thermal curtains, waiting for a repair budget that existed on paper but not yet in the bank. Mara wore her charcoal coat and forest green scarf. Her worn gardening gloves had finally split at one thumb, and Ruthie had repaired them with green thread. The old deed box sat on a high shelf in the potting room. It now held copies of the survey, well permit, electrical diagram, and recorded deed. The original will remain in the court file. The planting ledgers occupied the shelf beside Mara's new records. She had reset the loose paver beneath the table, but not perfectly. Old floors deserved some movement. That afternoon, 6 adult growers gathered around the potting table for the winter propagation exchange. Ruthie poured coffee. Helen brought cookies, purchased from a bakery, and accepted praise without correcting anyone who assumed she had baked them. Owen stood beneath the repaired roof section and claimed personal responsibility for the sunlight. A nursery owner from across the river asked Mara how she kept hellebore crowns from rotting in the old beds. Mara crouched beside a bench and showed her the drainage layer, the amended soil, and the exact depth of planting. Her knee complained when she stood. Owen held out one hand. Mara used it without argument. Through the glass, the mansion windows caught the declining sun. For years, Mara had measured herself by what the house needed, then by what Daniel needed, then by what his children might take. The greenhouse required things too: heat, labor, money, patience, but it answered care with visible consequences. A repaired frame held. A cutting rooted or did not. An order arrived because someone trusted her to fill it. Ruthie called from the potting room, "Mara, where are the extra labels? Second shelf beneath the dormant stock. They're labeled labels. That was your idea. It's an excellent system." Mara turned from the mansion. Inside, the amber work lamp shone over coffee cups, soil-streaked hands, order sheets, and the brick floor where Daniel's last provision for her had waited beneath one loose paver. What he left had not spared her grief, expense, or work. It had given those things a boundary. Someone asked her to demonstrate the next cutting. Mara stepped back into the light and began.